This story has haunted my family for 4 generations. I used to visit my great-grandparents often as a small boy. My great-grandfather was a tall, robust man with a sense of humor that was always youthful and lively. We connected despite the age gap, and I always looked forward to our time together. But one day, everything changed. It was just he and I in the house. My grandparents had gone out, leaving me with him. I remember walking into the living room to find him sitting in his rocking chair. But he wasn't the same. He was eerily still, his expression somber, and the twinkle in his eye was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling seriousness. I could sense something was off, and despite my usual carefree demeanor, I couldn't help but feel the weight of his silence. At first, I didn't know how to approach him. I was a child, but even then I could feel the unease in the room. Finally, I blurted out, "What's got you all upset, old man?" I always called him that as a joke, but today it felt like a poor attempt at breaking the tension. His face shifted, and a small grin crept back onto his lips, but it was weak, almost as if he was trying to hold something back. "Would you think I were crazy if I told you a story?" he asked. It was unlike him that I immediately took a step back. I hadn't expected something like this. "What's the story about?" "A ghost story." I was a little bit scared. Okay, I said. And then he started with his tale. I grew up with a man called Jeremiah. He lived in a house besides ours when I was a kid. We were best friends all through school, and after high school I joined the military and went off to college. We lost touch for a while, but when I returned home after 6 years in Japan, we reconnected. We decided to go hunting one weekend, something we had done many times before. He paused, the memory clearly taking him somewhere dark. His fingers clenched around the armrest of the chair, and I could feel his unease growing. That morning, something didn't feel quite right. It was subtle, just an uncomfortable feeling in the pit of my stomach. I almost called off the trip, but pushed it aside thinking it was just nerves. Jeremiah felt it too, motion sickness on the drive to the spot. But we tried to shrug it off. The road was winding after all. When we arrived, I noticed something strange. The place didn't look like the way I'd remembered it. There was a clearing I didn't recognize, and the air was too light. My gut was screaming at me to turn around and leave, but I pressed on. I walked into the clearing, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, breathing. It was close, right behind me. The wind picked up, swirling in the direction like it had a mind of its own. And that's when I turned to tell Jeremiah to step back, but he was gone. I called for him. Nothing. I whistled, but there was no response. My heart was pounding and panic set in. I turned and ran back to where we parked, but when I got there, his truck was gone. I could feel my breath catching in my chest as he spoke. I could almost picture it, the isolation, the growing sense of dread. I drove back furious that he'd left without a word. I went straight to his house, but when I got there, his parents were sitting in the living room. I asked them when Jeremiah would be home, but they looked at me like I was crazy. They told me they hadn't a son called Jeremiah, and he was never a part of the family. I was beyond confused. I started looking around. No one knew him. No one had even heard of him. He wasn't in any of my yearbooks. I couldn't find his name anywhere. He let out a chuckle, but it didn't sound like humor. The only evidence I had was the packing list, the one we'd made for the trip. It's old and worn now, but his name is still there. What he was supposed to bring, what we were going to do. But no one, not a single person could remember him. Jeremiah was gone, like he'd never existed to begin with. Then there was this long pause, and I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. His eyes were distant now, and the sadness was palpable. I wanted to say something, but I was speechless, trapped in the same haunted silence he was. Not knowing what to do, finally I hugged him. He seemed lost in his own mind, and I began to worry that he was slipping. When my grandfather came to pick me up, I mentioned to him that I thought my great-grandfather might need more help, that he was losing touch with reality. But then my grandfather stopped me before I could say anything else. "He's not losing it yet," my grandfather said, his voice steady, but there was an odd, almost fearful glint in his eyes. "He's been telling that story since I was a kid. He told it to your dad too. I believe him. Or at least I believe he believes it." Those words unsettled me. My grandfather didn't believe in ghosts or aliens or anything supernatural. So for him to say that, it made my blood run cold. I've never forgotten that story, or the packing list. It's still in my possession, actually, worn with age, but the name Jeremiah remains. A reminder of something that I cannot explain. And as time goes on, I wonder what really happened that fateful day, or that long ago. Did Jeremiah get caught up in some kind of glitch in reality? And get thrown into another world, a parallel universe perhaps, where my grandfather didn't exist? But I trust my great-grandfather's story. Maybe one of you can make more sense of it than I can.
About 15 years ago, I worked part-time for my dad at a cemetery just outside of town. It was nothing glamorous, mostly groundkeeping. He handled the landscaping, mowing, trimming, and watering, and cleaning up after services. I was the extra set of hands he called in after big funerals or during holidays when things got messy, as people leave a lot behind. Tissues, wrappers, half-eaten food, even beer bottles. We weren't trying to disrespect the dead, quite the opposite. Family appreciated coming back to a clean gravesite. It was simple and quiet work, and honestly I didn't mind it. And it wasn't creepy either, at least not for a long time. I only ever worked during the day, nothing paranormal, no strange figures, no cold spots, just grass and stones and the normal stuff. So there was this burial scheduled for a family of 3, a husband and a wife and their child, victims of a home invasion. The details were fuzzy. I hadn't paid much attention to the news at the time, but my dad told me that their lives had been taken while at home. Something brutal and senseless. Their plots were near the back of the cemetery, in what we called the prestige section, where prominent locals were often laid to rest. We spent a full day prepping the area, clearing the brush, trimming trees, raking fresh gravel. It had to be perfect. And then, of course, we had to section it off to prevent anyone else from coming into the area while the service was going on. I wasn't scheduled to work, but I stopped by anyway to grab my paycheck and just say hi to my dad. As I pulled in, I saw the full parking lot and realized the service must be in progress, so I quietly entered through the back to not disturb anyone. My dad was inside. He appeared distracted. He kept glancing towards the windows like he was expecting something, and I asked him what was up, and he told me the whole thing felt strange. He said a few black SUVs had pulled in at the end of the funeral procession, way behind the other vehicles, and from one of them stepped a man surrounded by 4 or 5 bodyguards dressed in dark suits. I figured it was some kind of high-profile relative, perhaps police protection given how the family died. But my dad wasn't so sure. He said the air changed when they got there, like everyone knew not to ask questions. He laughed it off, but it had clearly upset him. So I left with my check and tried not to think much more of it. That night we were all at my parents' place for dinner. My mum had just had surgery on her knee, so we were helping out. We were finishing dessert when my dad started getting antsy again. He simply couldn't shake this feeling, like he'd forgotten something important. We checked everything, the stove, the doors, the dog. He even called my sister and everything was fine. Then he said, "What if I forgot to lock something up at the cemetery?" He wasn't the owner, but he treated the place like it was, and if anything happened, the blame would inevitably fall on him. So I offered to go, just a quick check. It was already dark, but I figured it would take 15 minutes tops. Lock a door, ease his mind, done. Mum and Dad hesitated, but I waved it off. I didn't believe in superstition, and it's not like the dead were going to get up and complain. I drove over and pulled into the lot. And that's when I saw the car. It was old and beat to hell and definitely didn't belong there. It looked like it hadn't moved in years. The paint was sun-bleached, and the tires sunk into the gravel. I walked around it. There was no one inside. I shook it off and went inside the office, and everything seemed fine. The doors were locked, the lights were off, the equipment was stored away. And I called my dad from the landline to let him know it was all clear. He sounded relieved. I was locking the front entrance when something caught my eye. The main cemetery gates, the ones that should have been chained shut, were wide open, and the lock was dangling from the side. That's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was wrong. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe my dad forgot to chain it up after the rush. I was about to leave it alone, but I couldn't. Something was compelling me to check. So against my better judgment, I skipped the golf cart and walked the grounds on foot. Everything was fine until I got to the back. That family grave, the new ones we'd just dug. It was torn apart. Dirt piled off to the side, one headstone knocked over, and 2 shovels laid in the grass, and deep gouges in the earth showed someone had been working fast. They were robbing the grave. I turned to run, and that's when everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying face down in the grass, head pounding. It was still dark, and for a second I thought I'd dreamt it, until I heard the shovels, that metallic scrape of steel on soil. I tried to move, and there was something cold pressed to the back of my skull. I froze. I'll never forget that sound, the hammer being pulled back. I raised my hand slowly. I didn't even speak. I just breathed, shallow and terrified. I could hear at least 3 voices, low and fast, not in English. I couldn't place the language, but the intent was clear, that I shouldn't move. After what felt like an hour, one of them barked something sharp, another pressed my shoulder down, and I was told to lie flat and count to 100. I think I got to 6 before everything went dark again. And the next time I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My head had been split open. Concussion, bruised ribs, dehydration. My parents were frantic. My dad had panicked after I hadn't returned in half an hour. He drove to the cemetery and found my car, driver door open, tire slashed, and no sign of me. He called the police, who arrived minutes later, and found me unconscious behind the grave. The robbers were long gone. They had completely exhumed the husband's casket, pried it open, smashed it to bits, and taken something from inside. What it was, no one ever said. Jewelry, cash, a USB, the whole thing reeked of something deeper than a simple robbery, and whoever those men were at the funeral, no one in the family would talk about it. The police took my statement, but nothing ever came of it. No arrests, no fingerprints, no cameras, until my dad demanded security upgrades. Now they've got motion lights, lock gates, cameras, everything. Mostly they catch raccoons or the occasional homeless guy sleeping in the lot. But I never went back at night, and I never will.
My father wasn't just a logger. He was a cutter. One of the few trained to handle the sawbeasts known as tree harvesters. Machines built like tanks, armed with spinning blades capable of slicing 100-foot pines like butter. His work took him to the farthest reaches of the wilderness, places so remote they don't appear on any map, right in the middle of nowhere. This job was already off. The road up the mountain had been devoured by time, covered in fallen trees, landslides, and thick, choking brush. It took them 3 weeks to clear a path for the machine. No one was supposed to be up there. No trails, no hunters, no sign of life. Just the hiss of wind and the mechanical growth of metal teeth biting into wood. My father was teamed with another cutter, a guy called Rene. They worked long hours, often sleeping in battered campers parked near the work zone. Pay was based on volume, not time, so they pushed themselves to 16 to 20-hour shifts, alone in that forest, day after day. It began with the radios, strange fragmented voices leaking through their headsets, barely audible whispers, static-laced syllables that meant nothing. They changed channels, but the voices followed. Sometimes it sounded like laughter, and others it sounded like chattering, too garbled to understand and too clear to ignore. The deeper they cut into the forest, the more distinct the voices became. Two men conversing in low tones. They weren't workers and they weren't from the crew. My father and Rene both agreed something was wrong. They were not lost hikers or survivalists. They were stalking. That's when they began to find things. Odd rusted out containers in the brush, makeshift fire pits still warm with ash, and trash bags buried under leaves. It was clear that someone else was here living with them. But the mountain was 2.5 hours from the nearest sign of civilization, and there was no way in except for the road that they themselves had cleared. Didn't make sense. Then they found the tent. Rene spotted it tucked into the tree line, camouflaged beneath ferns and filth. Inside one of the sleeping bag, a dented duffel bag, and when they unzipped it, children's underwear. Dozens of pairs. Not only that, but rope, duct tape, then crumpled sketches of stick-figure children being assaulted, drawn with disturbing childish scrawls. Candid photographs of kids at parks in yards, looking over their shoulders. The apple on the ground beside the sleeping bag was fresh. They weren't alone, and the person out there was far worse than they'd imagined. Rene wanted to leave immediately, but my dad, always stubborn, always trying to push through the pain, refused. He insisted on finishing the job. Just a few more days. They agreed to speak over radio only in emergencies, hoping to hear more from the intruders. What they heard chilled them. One man talking about collecting firewood, and another one complained about the noise of the machines. They didn't even sound like they were hiding. They sounded comfortable, as if this was their mountain. Finally, my dad snapped. One evening after a long day of cutting, he grabbed the radio and barked out, "Who are you? Why are you here?" There was silence, and the voices never returned. That night, Rene shook my dad awake in a panic. "Get your gun. Someone's outside." My dad sat up in total silence, and then heard soft footsteps circling the camper. Something scraped under the metal undercarriage, then a click, the doorknob turning. The camper door creaked open, but no one climbed in. They waited in the darkness, and minutes passed. Then scratching sounds just beyond the door. My dad nodded to Rene and crept to the door, gun in hand. Unloaded. He realized too late the rounds were somewhere in his pack. He never found them. As he approached the door, a flash of movement, then searing pain. A jagged blade raked from his right eyebrow across his nose to his left cheek, and stumbled out of the camper, landing hard. A man with a knife followed, lunging on top of him. Another figure appeared behind them, kicking my father in the head with steel-toed boots. Dazed and nearly unconscious, he saw Rene leap from the camper and tackle the attacker. The second man fled into the woods like a ghost. The other one with the knife scrambled after him, leaving behind only a smear of blood on the dirt and a glint of blade in the moonlight. They didn't sleep that night. They drove hours through darkness to the nearest town, where my father received stitches and a partial reconstructive surgery. The blade had torn his right eye. To this day it looks less like a human eye and more like a slitted cat's pupil. Neither he nor Renee ever went back there. 2 weeks later, the rest of the logging crew returned to finish the job. One of them, a guy called Keegan, went missing. He was found days later dumped in a ditch off the side of the logging trail, bound, gagged, violated, with his throat cut so deeply it had almost removed his head. The police never found the men. No arrests, no suspects. My father hasn't worked a day in the woods since, and sometimes he wakes up screaming in the night. When I was 12, I was walking to my psychiatrist for my weekly appointment. It's a half-hour walk after dark, and I enjoy walking, especially after dark when things were quiet, peaceful, and slow and no one else was around. I didn't live in a dangerous neighborhood, nor did my walk take me through any dangerous neighborhoods. As I'm about halfway to my destination, a car, a Cadillac, comes driving down the street. Some people, both male and female, were in the car, sticking themselves halfway out the window and taunting and jeering at me as they drive by. They were a bunch of teens in their early 20s and such, and I ignore them and keep on walking. About a minute or two later, the same car comes down the street again, and those people are jeering at me, taunting me again, and I don't know who they are. Maybe they live in the neighborhood. I still ignore them and keep walking. Another minute or so goes by, and again they come driving down the street, taunting and jeering, and now I'm worried. They're circling the block over and over, deliberately focusing on me. As soon as they reach the corner and make the turn and are out of sight, I duck behind some bushes in someone's front yard and wait. The car comes again down the street. This time, not seeing me walk down the street, they're not jeering. They pass right by me in my hiding place and turn the corner. They think I finally reached my destination, one of the houses on the block, and went inside as a result and driven away. But I thought wrong. Stupidly, I leave my hiding place and go back to walking on my way to my psychiatrist. But I should have stayed in those bushes much longer, because that's when I hear the car approaching. They spot me and start it all up again. They turn the corner. This time I run towards my destination, but I know I won't get far before the car and those kids catch up with me again. So to that effect, I decided to hide behind the bushes in front of an apartment complex, this time resolving to stay there for a good while until the thugs in the car give up their search for me. I'm hiding in the bushes for not long, maybe 30 seconds, and when a guy of those apartments pops out from his apartment, asking why I'm hiding in the bushes. At first, he probably thinks I'm a burglar or something, but I explain to him how I'm walking to my psychiatrist and how I'm being followed and harassed by a bunch of kids in a car, which is why I was hiding. The guy can instantly tell from the tone of my voice and facial expressions that I'm telling him the truth, and can see how scared I am. Just then, the car comes down the street and pulls right up at the curb directly in front of us. They look at me and the guy I'm with. Not a mean-looking guy in his late 30s, but tough and serious-looking enough. He's not wearing a shirt, but he's wearing a sleeveless undershirt, which reveals that the guy's upper body is very well toned and muscular. I'm looking at the car and realize it's missing a few people from inside. It doesn't look so full now. The guy I'm with just gives them a mean stare and asks, "Do you know them?" I explain to him that I don't. Just then, as the car is sitting there, about 3 of them approach walking from the other direction. The car was traveling east to west, and those 3 were walking on foot, so west to east. That's why the car didn't seem so full. They were looking to escalate the situation. They weren't satisfied with just driving by and taunting me. They changed tactics. A few of them got out of their car up ahead and started walking towards me while the others in the car took another turn around the block. Their plan now was to physically trap me in between them and their car, perhaps grab me, drag me into their car for whatever reason. But seeing my tough guy guardian angel with me, The kids walking towards the car instead got into the car and it took off. The guy offered to stay with me a little longer, or if I wanted to duck into his apartment and stay there until I was sure it was safe to continue on the journey. I had a feeling that that was the last I was going to see of those guys in their car, and I didn't want to be late for my appointment, so I thanked him for his offer but declined, and decided to head on my way. The guy returned to his apartment and closed the door, and I looked at the closed door and hoped that I hadn't made a mistake by turning down the guy's help for better safety, because I was still afraid. But thankfully I was right about not seeing the car again, and the rest of my walk was unremarkable. I reached my psychiatrist's office, told the therapist about what happened, and he insisted on calling the police. The police came and took a report from me, and that was the last I heard of it. On my way back, I usually took the same route that I came up, but this evening I varied my way home, taking some different side streets to walk on, and I never saw that car or the thugs again. I was around 8 years old when this happened. It was a warm summer evening, and I had been invited to my friend's backyard barbecue. Her name was Llewellyn. Llewellyn lived in a house with a large backyard, half of it a wooden patio where the adults gathered, chatting and laughing. The other half a patch of grass where we played. In the far corner of the yard stood a small play tent, stuffed with old toys and blankets, a perfect hideout for us kids. Llewellyn had a next-door neighbor, another little girl our age called Brenda. She would often come over to play, and today was no different. Llewellyn decided to text Brenda to invite her over, and within seconds got a reply that she'll be right over. Llewellyn turned to me and said, "Hold on, I'll go get her." She then left through the pathway that curved around the house leading towards Brenda's home. And then, not even 5 seconds later, Brenda walked into the backyard alone. I had just seen Llewellyn leave for her, but here was Brendan walking in like she had just come from her home. Maybe she couldn't wait and decided to walk over. It was odd, but I didn't think much of it. "Hey, Brenda," I greeted her. We chatted for a minute, and then she turned and crawled into the tent, shutting herself inside. And then, less than a minute later, Llewellyn returned with Brenda. I felt a wave of dread creep up my spine. Brenda, the same girl who had already been here, was now walking in the yard again side by side with Llewellyn. But something was different. Her hair. The first Brenda had worn her hair in a high ponytail, but this one's hair was completely loose, falling around her shoulders. I turned back to the tent, expecting to see the first Brenda step out, maybe laughing, telling me it was some kind of joke. But the tent never moved, and the only exit was the one at the front. There was no secret compartment she could slide through, and bear in mind, I had been just outside the tent the whole time. So there was nowhere for her to go, no magical place for her to vanish to reappear on the other side of the house just moments later. And I watched in stunned silence as second Brenda joined us, acting like nothing was wrong. I never told Llewellyn or Brenda what I saw that day. Not then, not ever. Even now as an adult, I struggled to make sense of it. Did I imagine it? A trick of the light? A lapse in memory? Or did reality falter for that brief time?
This happened about 4 months ago. My friend called and asked if I could give him a jump. His work car wasn't starting. He works private security, checking on properties that have had vandalism or break-ins, and tonight he was doing a late patrol alone. I said sure, because it was going to take at least a few hours for someone from his company to reach him. He dropped me his location, and I began making my way there. I never thought much of it, until I turned onto the driveway and realized where he was. A cemetery, of course. And not near the entrance either. He was way on the far side of the property. so I just kept my eyes forward and drove the winding road through the graveyard. He was waving his flashlight to help me find him, and I pulled up next to his car and asked him what happened. He said it died out of nowhere while he was turning around in this gravel lot, just cut out completely. I had him pop the hood while I grabbed my jumper cables and some pliers from my trunk. When I checked under the hood, I saw a battery cable had come loose. No big deal. I slipped it back on and tightened it as best I could with the pliers. The moment the cable connected, his headlights came on, and that's when we realized we weren't alone. About 10 feet away, there was a child standing there. This kid, maybe 4 years old, was simply watching us. My friend, who's usually pretty unfazed by anything, said, "Hi," and asked if they needed any help. But before we could even finish looking at each other like, what the hell is this? We both looked back, and the kid was gone. Bear in mind, there was nowhere for them to have run to without us seeing or hearing them. As I said before, it was gravel, and there were no footsteps. My friend told me he had moments here, seeing things peek out from behind the trees or gravestones, but he said this was the first time he ever saw something just standing there. I told him to swing by my place later, so I could properly tighten the battery cable. Then I left. He stopped by my house not too long ago, and told me what happened after my departure. He'd forgotten his flashlight. It was back in the little gravel lot where I'd fixed his car, so he turned around to grab it. Only when he got there, it wasn't where he'd left it. He looked around, and that's when he noticed a faint light about halfway up a small nearby hill. He drove closer and saw his flashlight. It was resting on a gravestone. He didn't want to get out the car. Who would? But he forced himself to retrieve it. Just as he reached out to grab it, he heard a voice. A child's voice. He couldn't make out any of the words except for one. "Leave." So he did. He didn't come straight to my place, because he had one more property to check on. But the flashlight? He swore he left it on the ground near the car, and somehow it ended up nearly a quarter of a mile away, sitting upright on a headstone. And whatever said that word to him, it wasn't close. It sounded like it came from all around him. He said he's not going back there alone ever again. And honestly, I wouldn't either.
About 15 years ago, I lived in Sulphur, Oklahoma. My playground? The Chickasaw National Recreation Area. I loved that park so much. I rode more miles on my bike than anywhere else. I walked nearly every trail and rode nearly every road. Every day I would ride my mountain bike up and down the trails and would be home by nightfall most days. One night, however, I had rode out a bit further than usual. On my way back, I decided to ride the trail from an area known as Buffalo Springs, where they have live buffalo roam, and there is a large spring for everyone to enjoy. As I was riding back, I knew the end of the trail was coming up, and I would have to cross a stone bridge across the creek, then up the road to my home. It was dark at this time, and all I had to use to see was the full moon. I was perhaps a few hundred yards from it when I got a sharp pain in my left thigh. I stopped and looked around to see what just hit me. Then I heard a noise sounding like something hitting the ground hard in front of me. There was a rock about the size of a baseball rolling across the trail. I was confused and started to look up the side of this hill. Just as I turned my head to look, I almost fall off my bike when another rock comes flying down, hitting my front wheel. I finally have my eyes adjusted to look and see someone very tall and dark and covered in hair at the top of the hill, throwing these things at me and screaming. I yelled I had a cell phone and was going to call the cops. I didn't actually have a cell phone at the time. This seemed to piss it off. He started charging down the hill towards me, and I, for obvious reasons, lit up the bike and took off. Just as I crossed the bridge, I heard a huge splashing noise in the creek and saw that a large rock had been thrown. I was in the clear to go home, but was frightened all the way there. I went to the ranger station the next morning and told the ranger. He says, "Oh, so you were attacked by Bigfoot?" I don't know, but something was trying to hurt me out there. "Okay, Justin. If I see Bigfoot, I'll let you know." I said it was fine and left. The very next week I was riding in the daylight, when the park ranger pulled up next to me and asked for me to get in. When I asked why, he said he needed to show me something. We headed to the police department in town, and before we got out the car, he turns to me and says, Justin, I have to give you an apology. I'll be honest, I didn't believe you when you told me your story of being attacked. But it's come to my attention that a few people in the same area that same night were attacked in the same way, saying they saw a large hairy thing throwing rocks and sticks and screaming. They called the cops and came out with some other rangers, including me, and then I remembered what you told me. When we arrived and started up the hill, sure enough, we were having rocks and things thrown at us, guns drawn and yelling. 2 officers tackled a man to the ground. He was 6'5", tall, naked, covered in mud, and had long hair and a large beard. He'd actually escaped from the Veterans Center. Apparently he thought he was back in Vietnam and trying to take out the enemy. The ranger told me all these things, and ended with how I was very lucky, because he was in fact trying to end my life. We went inside so that I could give the police my statement. They had to send him to a more secure facility for treatment. And to this day I still get shivers when I hike that trail, and always keep my eyes on the ridgetop. This happened after I went to university. I was 18. I made an effort to make friends after I moved onto campus, and ended up with a few friend groups to hang out with, including a new girlfriend, and plenty of people from my class that I liked well enough. There was one class before lunch, where it was traditional for people to go to the cafeteria afterwards to eat in pairs or threes. I wasn't very discerning about who I'd have lunch with, because I got on fine with most people from the class, and we were all trying to make an effort to be social. So when one girl, Lily, asked if I wanted to eat lunch together after that class, I didn't have any reason not to go. We spoke about school and that kind of stuff, nothing particularly noteworthy, but she did ask me to get lunch with her again the next week, and it became a pattern. And there wasn't exactly a way of starting saying no. It became a pattern, and there wasn't exactly a way to start saying no suddenly. It was fine, but it did mean I lost the chance to eat lunch with anyone else on those days, which in hindsight I suppose was the point. One day in class I asked someone if I could add them on social media. This happened in front of Lily, and I saw her face jerk towards me from a few seats over. It was such a sharp reaction that it was hard to ignore, and I still remember it. By the time I got home later that day, Lily had sent me a friend request. No friends in common. Dunno how she knew my last name. It was a bit of a surprise, but I guess she just dug through the university's social media pages and found me through there. It gave me a bad feeling, but surely it was fine. She ended up messaging me a lot and commenting on anything I posted. I told myself she was just awkward, and we became friends, if not close. I'd known worse people. She still always got me to go eat lunch with her after one of our shared classes. Other than that, we rarely spent time together in person. I saw her around sometimes, but I never went out of my way to hang out with her. So it was mostly online messages and seeing each other in group settings. Coincidentally, my girlfriend was also called Lily. This was something that clearly bothered Lily, not my girlfriend, who couldn't have found it less interesting, and she occasionally hinted that she wanted my girlfriend to pick a different name, or joked about her not suiting it. She clearly didn't like my girlfriend at all, and I had an idea of why. It was hard to ignore at this point. Lily was starting to unsubtly hint that she had a crush on me. I tried not to address it, because what was I even going to say? I've never known what to do when a friend makes a pass at me. I also was not interested in the slightest. Even ignoring the weird stuff she pulled, Lily wasn't my type at all. She tended to dress and act in a way somewhere between a 50s housewife and one of those adults who's still obsessed with Disney princesses. Things took an uncomfortable turn on the day of our last shared class of the year. Instead of asking me to lunch like she usually did, she asked if I would go on a walk with her. Again, I didn't exactly know how to refuse, so I said all right. Our campus was bordered by a large patch of woodland, and Lily led me into the woods, and the sounds of our fellow students slowly faded away. She sat down on a log and I joined her, and she started talking about how she was going to miss me over the summer. I tried placating her, but I didn't want to be there, especially because she seemed almost on the verge of tears. I think I tried to make an excuse about having plans with my girlfriend before I could leave. Lily chose to kiss me without warning. It was uncomfortable to say the least. I got out of there and was happy to think that I wouldn't see her for a while. I came back to the university after summer, moving into a house with friends. There were some serious issues in my friend group though, a lot of petty arguing and worse. I broke up with my girlfriend around the start of that school year as well, and basically the whole mess made me recontextualize things with Lily, because it suddenly didn't seem as bad. That said, I didn't want to be alone with her. We mostly spoke online, and she was still constantly messaging me after all. One upside of everything was that I started dating a boy. Lily was not pleased to hear the news. I think she hoped to sneak in after I broke up with my girlfriend, but as I said before, that was never going to happen. There wasn't a big gap between my breakup and this new relationship, so she must have thought she missed her chance with me. This is when the story gets bad. At this time, I was fairly active on Tumblr. I occasionally talk about my life and mostly reblogged photos and stuff. I was on there one day when something odd happened. One of the blogs I followed had received an ask with some phrases I recognized. It took a second to register that it was taken from my About page. That made me freeze. I read the message properly. Someone was asking this completely random person to analyze this section of text from my page, asking for their opinion on the type of person who would write it. I cannot stress how messed up it was to see people talking about me like I was a character in a book they were trying to study. The reply was basically, "Sorry, I don't know." But the important thing was that the question hadn't been anonymous, it was linked to someone's blog. Obviously, I wanted to know about who had taken such a bizarre interest in me. As far as I knew, no one in real life other than my boyfriend knew about my page, or no prizes for guessing who was behind it. What I found was a shrine. She was using a fake name, but I recognized Lily all over that thing. It was the cutesy pink and red page. There were few posts about her interests, but most of the context was focused about her primary interest, me. Most of the posts were about me. There were accounts of things I'd done recently. He told me such and such. He went to a nightclub recently, as well as references to things from as far back as I'd known her. It was clear she'd been keeping tabs on me both on and offline, gathering up every scrap of information she could about my life and hoarding it here in her collection. She talked about us eating lunch together and how special our dates were, as if it had been anything more than acquaintances getting food after class. She talked about the time she had forcibly kissed me in the woods, but she wrote as if it had been mutual. She quoted lyrics from my favorite song and talked about how she'd always be there for me, no matter who else came into my life. Lots of references to loving me just the way he is, which answered another mystery about an anonymous love letter I'd received earlier that year with the same wording. It got worse. There were a lot of posts about my boyfriend too. These weren't so nice. They got vicious, talking about how he doesn't deserve me, how he didn't know what he had. If she were with me, she'd be jealous of anyone else who came near me. So my boyfriend not being a jealous person meant he couldn't love me. It was angry and hateful. I didn't like to think about the sort of person who could write so obsessively being fixated on me. One thing that didn't make sense at first was that the blog also made plenty of references to Lily's best friend, Stephen. She had never mentioned this person to me. Her post spoke about Stephen a lot, and how great a friend he was, and how much fun they had together, and how he looked out for her. I was trying to work out whether this was an online friend when one specific post made it all click. She had posted a photo and captured it with, "Stephen sent this to me. He knew I would like it, and I love it." The problem was the photo was taken from my own page. I hadn't sent it to her. She took it from my page and then claimed this fictional best friend of hers shared it with her, because in her head, she'd split me into two people. In her messed up fantasy life, I was both the perfect best friend who was always looking out for her, and her soulmate, who was bound up to end up with her once I finally got over my sweet, kind boyfriend and all these other easy girls I hung out with that she made dozens of posts complaining about. Who was she complaining to? Oh, Lily had an audience. She had open questions about me and her relationship with me, and got messages back from her followers. People who took what she said at face value. I saw a bunch of random people agreeing with this stalker that my boyfriend didn't deserve me, and we were bound to break up soon so I could be with Lily, the person I was clearly supposed to be with. She had this fake, fan fiction version of my life for anyone to share their opinion on, and she'd made herself out to be the hero of it all. I went maybe a month back into this page's history. I didn't look at everything, there was simply too much. I'm not sure how long it had been going on for. I sent Lily a message confronting her about the blog, and she said nothing. I cannot stress how weird it was to have found a page and pages dedicated to me, with her talking about how she was in love with me, and how she would ensure we ended up together, slamming my boyfriend, building a fantasy life with two versions of me, in which she clearly believed to be real, then acting out like it had never happened. She said nothing. She didn't address it, she just changed the subject even after I pushed it, and it was like it hadn't even registered with what I'd said. I've never seen anything else like it. Of course, she eventually deleted the page, or at least changed its name to hide it, so I never found it again. It wasn't the end though. I wasn't going to hang out with her anymore, but we were still shoved together in classes, and she had started to actually scare me with what she might do next. I'm kind of a paranoid person, knowing someone was obsessively keeping track of me for who knows how long. It freaked me out. The next thing she pulled was trying to seduce my boyfriend. It was an absolutely useless attempt that only made him feel uncomfortable, and he told me about it right away. What was her plan there? Did she hope to tell me he cheated and wait for me to break up with him? Why would I want her after that? When that didn't work out for her, she tried hitting on 3 of my other friends, and none of them took the bait. She ended up dating one of my former housemates for a while, but made sure to send me messages while they were together, to let him know that she'd rather be with me. No thanks. Lily made sure to stay in my life the whole time I was at university, and she ended up starting rumors about me and damaging a career opportunity I'd put a lot of work into. I don't know what else she did behind my back, but it made me realize it was safer to let her think she was a part of my life while ignoring her, rather than doing something that would make her angry. After I graduated, Lily still wanted to spend time together, but I knew now I didn't have to. I made excuses of work and barely talked to her after a point. I almost entirely stopped posting on any social media accounts that I knew she knew of. But of course, she didn't give up that easy. She tried to start conversations, asked me to meet up with her, attempts I usually ignored, but I didn't like to think she was still tracking me online, but she probably was. I don't know how, but she'd occasionally reference things I mentioned online somewhere she shouldn't have known about. The last time we had a real conversation, she sent me a message out of nowhere, We hadn't spoken at all in months, and we hadn't talked about anything serious in much longer than that. Thinking about that conversation makes my skin crawl. At first, she asked me some questions about how long I'd known I was queer. I told her some basic stuff, the kind of things I'd tell anyone who asked. But then she changed the subject. She started talking about how I would feel about her if I was a boy, about wanting to be a boy for me. The messages quickly became fetishistic. She went into plenty of detail about fantasies she had about the two of us. Again, we were not friends at this point, we'd never been especially close, at least not from my perspective, and we had barely spoken for years. I can't imagine sending messages like that to even a close friend, let alone someone who barely knows you. I tried telling her not to pull this crap with me, but she decided to change tactics. She sent photos of herself followed by a bunch of messages, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, way too fast for me to reply before the next one arrived, basically quoting back what I told her about myself and my past earlier. She was telling me these things as if they had happened to her. She was role-playing as me. The worst part was that she seemed to believe it was real, that those things actually had happened to her, even though she was quoting me word for word, things I'd told her only hours before. It was like she was trying to absorb my story, to take over it, to make my life part of her. Yeah, I didn't want to talk to her again after that. I ignored future attempts she made to speak with me, and I eventually silently deleted her from the inactive social media, which was her only way of reconnecting with me. I really thought she might finally move on. But a few days ago, she sent me a friend request. It's sitting there unanswered because I know if I'll delete it, she'll only send another. Lily and I met nearly 12 years ago now. This story is just the highlights, and even then, it's only the stuff I know about. A lot happened behind my back. And to the girl who spent 12 years obsessing, fetishing me and stalking me, I'd rather your fantasy life stay in your head and we not see each other anytime soon. I was 18 years old when this happened. It was summer, and my mum and I decided to grab some pizza for lunch. We had 2 dogs, Gracie, a 50-pound sweetheart, and Eddie, a 100-pound powerhouse. Before leaving, my mum reminded me to let them outside so that they wouldn't have any accidents while they were gone. They had plenty of shade outside, fresh water, and we'd only be gone for an hour, so it was nothing unusual. An hour goes by and we pull back into the driveway. I went to the back door to let the dogs in. I called them, but there was nothing. That wasn't weird. They weren't the best at listening. So I called out again. Still nothing. Then I tried the "Mum's mad" voice. That one never failed to get them running. But I was met with more silence. A knot tightened in my stomach. I stepped outside and checked under the house. Our home was elevated about a foot off the ground, and despite our efforts to block off the crawl space, the dogs were obsessed with squeezing in there. But when I got to the grate, our blockade was still intact. Now my mum joined the search. We combed the entire backyard. Our yard was enclosed by a 6-foot privacy fence, which was too high for them to jump. There were no holes dug under the fence, and the gate was padlocked, and the 2 side doors leading outside were locked from the inside. They simply couldn't have gotten out. We moved inside. My mum had already searched the house, but I checked again. Every room, every corner, every closet. I looked under beds, behind furniture, in the bathtub, everywhere. Every conceivable nook and cranny was explored. But we came up shy. And these weren't small dogs that could have been easily hidden. This was an 100-pound dog and a 50-pound dog that were now completely gone. Panic set in. The only other explanations left were impossible. Did someone steal them? That wasn't unheard of in our area. Dog fighting rings were common, and Eddie looked like a breed they'd often target. With our stomachs in knots, we jumped into the car and drove around the neighborhood searching as far as we thought they could have gotten. Nothing. We returned home defeated. The house was locked up tight, just as we had left it. I headed to the backyard ready to crawl under the house one last time, and my mum went to her room to post about our missing dogs and start making flyers. And then she yells at me to get in. My mum's voice rang through the house with pure panic, and I ran inside and froze. There they were. Eddie was wagging his tail up and down and trotted to me. Gracie followed, stretching like she had just awoken from a nap. I turned to my mother, who looked ghost white. They were there. Just there, she whispered, pointing to their beds. The same beds we had checked over and over again. The room was exactly how it had been left the whole time. Doors locked, windows closed, no way in or out. We have racked our brains for an explanation, but nothing makes sense. Did they glitch out of reality? Jump timelines? Or were they taken and then put back? Which then begs the question of how? They were so calm. None of this makes sense.
This happened around 2007, in a tiny, remote town in western New York. I was with my two friends, Jane and her boyfriend, John. We were out ghost hunting, nothing dramatic, just exploring old cemeteries, taking pictures, and see if anything would show up. At one point, Jane wanted a few more pictures, so John and I waited in my SUV while they wandered off into the older section of the cemetery with her flashlight. It was close to midnight. We were parked on a back road, and even though it was secluded, there were a few streetlights ahead on the road. Jane was behind us off to the right, but we could still see the bobbing of her flashlight. Everything was fine. Then it happened. John and I were both looking up ahead on the road when something just appeared. From under a streetlight on the left side of the road, a dark figure stepped into view. When I say dark, I don't mean dark as in silhouette. I mean a complete void of color, darker than anything I'd ever seen. It was human-shaped, but not human, with no features, no face, no texture. But what stood out the most was its hat, wide brim, flat top hat, almost like an old preacher's or undertaker's. We both froze. It took maybe 30 slow, deliberate steps, and then just before it reached the streetlight on the other side of the road, it morphed. It changed mid-step into the shape of a black cat, still that same featureless void, and disappeared silently into the open field beyond. John and I simply stared at each other. Neither of us could speak for a full 2 minutes. And when he finally did, all he could say was, You saw that too, right? We were just sitting there in stunned silence when Jane came back, knocking on the window. I couldn't even move to unlock the door. I managed to lift my hand just enough to hit the button. She opened the door and joked, "You look like you both seen the devil himself." John, who's a big guy, tall and muscular, someone you don't expect to shake easily, was visibly trembling. His eyes were red with tears. All he could manage to say was, "Cat." I tried to explain what happened, but the words came out jumbled. My brain was still trying to make sense of it, error 404ing all over the place. Jane didn't know what to think. She kept saying things like, "This isn't funny anymore. You're starting to scare me." John was so disturbed, he insisted we stop at his church on the way home. We stood in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary, hands clasped, whispering prayers in the dark, while John pleaded out loud for protection. On the drive home, I remember thinking how crazy it all sounded even to me. Years later, I reconnected with Jane after we'd fallen out of touch. The first thing that came up, unsurprisingly, was that night. She said she hadn't forgotten it. In fact, right after it happened, for weeks, every single cross in her mother's house turned upside down, by itself, as Jane and John were living with her mother at the time. It didn't stop until her mum went through the house praying intensively in each room and blessing everything she could. So did something follow them from the cemetery? I don't know. Years passed. Jane and John moved out of state. We all got on with our lives, more or less. Then one day, recently, something strange happened. I shared this story on Reddit, not thinking much of it, just wanting to get it out of my system. Later that day, our 16-year-old cat, my beloved pet, died suddenly in my arms. He hadn't been sick. It just happened, and I was heartbroken. My husband shared the news on Facebook, and not long after, Jane texted me, saying she was sorry. She then added that her family's 8-year-old dog had also died that very same day just earlier. And then Kelly, another friend who heard the story, messaged me that her 6-year-old completely healthy dog had also died that same day. 3 animals, 3 homes, 3 states, all gone within hours of each other. After I told the story again, I haven't told Jane, I published it online, and I'm not sure I ever will. A part of me desperately wants answers. But another part of me, the part that still wakes up at night remembering the dark void, the shape of a man, that part thinks perhaps I'm better off not knowing. A few years ago, my girlfriend Ava and I, both seasoned hikers, decided to take on a more remote stretch of the Appalachian Trail. We'd done parts of it before, mostly crowded sections up north, but we craved solitude, and we found it in the Mount Rogers National Recreation Area, near the Tennessee border. The plan was simple. 4 nights through dense forest and steep ridges, with the final day ending in Damascus. We left in early October, right as the leaves were turning gold. There was a chill in the air, and we parked the car in a small gravel lot off White Top Road and began to hike with high spirits and overstuffed packs. For the first few days we didn't see anyone. Just deer crashing through the underbrush and crows in the canopy, croaking like they were laughing at something we couldn't see. There was a strange beauty in the silence. On the 3rd night, we set up camp in a shallow hollow a few 100 feet off the trail. Ava found it, a little cozy dip between the trees, barely visible from any direction. We liked that. It felt nice, safe, and hidden. That night the fire was low, just glowing embers, and we were tucked into our sleeping bags inside the tent, when I felt her hand on my shoulder. "Wake up," she whispered urgently. "Something's outside." I froze. The woods were still. There was no wind, no owls, no crickets. Just tense silence. Then I heard a slow drag along the nylon wall of our tent. Ava grabbed my arm. It sounded like a knife earlier, like they were testing the fabric. My pulse was pounding so loud I could barely hear. I fumbled for the Judge revolver I kept in my pack, loaded with .410 shells. I didn't unzip the tent. I sat there frozen and listening. And then a snap, crunch, and another snap. Deliberate, slow footsteps. I unzipped the tent, just enough to slip out and scan the darkness. The moon was buried behind clouds, but I caught a glimpse of movement, low to the ground just beyond the tree line. I flicked on the flashlight, its harsh white beam cutting across the forest, but there was nothing. I stepped forwards, leaves crunching beneath me. Then to my right a crack. I spun towards it, flashlight trembling in my grip. A dark shape darted between trees. Then, back to my left, another sound. Someone or something was messing with me. I shouted into the woods, "I'm armed. Come near me and I swear to God I'll shoot."
but nothing answered. I stood guard until dawn, watching the shadows shift like breathing things. When daylight finally returned, I walked to the perimeter and found what I was dreading. A partial boot print in the soft loam, larger than mine, sunk heavy. Whoever left it had been close and watching. We broke camp quickly and hiked fast. No breaks, no talking. The woods felt different now, tense like they were waiting. That night I found a spot near a cliff with a natural stone overhang. We tucked the tent against the rock wall, thinking nothing could sneak up from behind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every gust of wind, every snapping twig, sent a chill down my spine. I gave Ava the 1911. Keep it close, don't hesitate. Aim for the chest. She nodded, her face pale and drawn. I don't think either of us truly believed we were safe. Hours passed. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion finally won. And I don't know how long I was out before I heard movement. Rustling, soft and careful, and the sound of something being dragged. I sat up, gun in hand, and Ava stirred for a moment. Against the thin fabric of the tent, I saw it. Maybe 5'8", head tilted, unmoving, as if listening to us breathe. I yelled at them to get the hell out of there and that I was armed. Whoever it was bolted crashing through the underbrush. I burst from the tent. Our gear was torn apart, food and clothes scattered. Someone had been rummaging through it with purpose. I followed the trail down to the nearby creek, and that's when I saw 4 of them. Flickering orange lights, held by figures on the far side of the creek, barely visible through the trees. None of them moved. They just watched. I backed away, heart hammering, and sprinted back to Ava. We're leaving. Now. We left everything behind except our pack and weapons. No tent, no stove, just survival gear. As we moved back towards the trail in the dead of night, the forest around us came alive with sound. Branches snapping, voices low and unintelligible, not whispers, chanting perhaps. I don't know. But the noise made my skin crawl. Hours later, as dawn began bleeding through the trees, we came to a sharp bend. I turned around instinctively and he was there, one of them, standing right in the middle of the trail. Just a dark outline against the grey-blue sky. I raised the gun and shouted, "Who are you?" He just turned and walked back into the trees. We didn't stop moving until we hit the edge of Damascus. I don't remember the last few miles. We were running on panic and fumes. I never found out who those people were or what they wanted. But there's something in those woods. It's not just animals or backwoods squatters. It's worse. And I will never go back. My high school counselor was a creep and a stalker. This took place in the 80s. I'm Japanese and Hispanic, and when I started high school I didn't know a single word in English, and speaking in either Spanish or Japanese was frowned upon. So I relied on my school counselor, as he was also Hispanic and was very kind, friendly and helpful and attentive. Mr. Miranda was a short, stubby, wrinkled man in his 60s with deep-stained yellow teeth, a thick, bushy moustache and awful breath. He wore thick Coke bottle glasses and was always finding reasons to pull me out of class, or he would wait for me to end my school day. The funny thing was, he always knew where I was. He would take me to his office and would close his door and often lock it. Most of the time, he complained about his kids and how he hoped his kids were as studious as I was. He would always say how beautiful I was, how smart I was for being able to start high school a year younger than typical Americans, and I would just awkwardly reply, "Gracias," or nod my head respectfully. At first, I didn't sense anything wrong, But slowly I felt uncomfortable going to his office for conversations that had nothing to do with my progress as a foreign student. And the way he would pick my chin up with his cold, hairy, nasty hands with long, bony fingers and would salivate by complimenting my full lips and my Asian eyes. I was most definitely not trying to get too close, as I avoided his nasty, smelly breath. It was horrendous. If you're familiar with the smell of an animal's corpse, imagine that, but worse. Often a misty shower would escape from his mouth, and depending on how close he would cowardly corner me, would end up on various parts of my face. I was young, naive, and very cute in a new country, and wasn't sure if this was normal behavior for a high school counselor. Mr. Miranda would get unusually close. Somehow he had a thing for my hair, and would either touch it or smell it. When that occurred to me, I would back off, and he would sound offended, and complain that I wasn't humble anymore, and the American culture wasn't for me. Not knowing who to tell and what to say, I endured being his prey for a little longer. I had been taught to respect my elders and to do what was asked of me no matter what, with no questions asked. The touch from this grotesque man bothered me. It made me grind my teeth. I wasn't used to being touched. My mother was the only one who did it once in a blue moon with a hug. I had just become a member of an extended family, and I didn't want to get in trouble, as my closest family members were very trustworthy, and we were so grateful that Mr. Miranda was so interested in helping me with my education. Sometimes I would skip school, but then Mr. Miranda would find out, and that would give him another excuse to take me to his office with the doors closed, and he would scold me. He would tell me that if I skipped school again without telling him where I was or with who, he would send me to another counselor who wouldn't know a word of Spanish or Japanese, and that I would surely fail. I was scared since I was new to the country and school, and didn't want to disappoint anyone, so I tried not to skip school as much, which in the long run helped me anyway. His typical questions were disturbing, as you will soon understand, and they included, but were not limited to, "You haven't kissed anyone, have you?" I would shyly say, "No, senor." "You won't tell anyone about our special connection? Because I'm doing it for your own bright future, right?" I would reply with a shaky voice, "No, sir." And this question would always leave me confused and questioning myself. "You haven't given your body to anyone, have you?" I felt so awkward, because I have no idea what he meant by that. All I knew is that no one else had ever touched me so awkwardly as he had, and I would reply, "No, sir." Then he would say, "Yvonne, you're very special to me, and I couldn't live knowing you did those things without telling me." I couldn't communicate with my teachers due to the language barrier, and my friends were struggling as well. I had enough from this creep. After my first semester, I made a promise that I would study day and night to learn English, and I had a good relationship with Mrs. B, my history teacher, and in broken English, I told her about the situation with Mr. Miranda. She looked surprised, but seemed to have put two and two together. Days passed. Then a typical day after school, Mr. Miranda had me in his office telling me that he was taking me out for a drive in his brand new shiny white Corvette with a bright red interior, and he was going to buy me nice things my family couldn't afford, and that he would be taking me home after the mall. I knew then this man was very dangerous, and he was up to no good. I knew my mother had told me going alone with someone in a car wasn't a good thing, and I didn't want to get into trouble. American culture or not, I wasn't going alone with this perv. I said, "I need to use your phone so I can tell my mom where you'll be taking me." Then he said, "No, don't call her. I already told her you'll be with me the rest of the day." I gasped and asked, "The rest of the day?" "What? Don't you trust me? You think I'd ever hurt a beautiful girl like you? What kind of monster do you think I am?" I began to scream and sprinted towards the door, but it was locked. I was cornered like an animal. I continued screaming and throwing whatever I could towards the window to make noise. Then Mr. Miranda said, "There's no one here. It's just you and I." He then went on to say he had done everything for me, and all of my actions towards him were ungrateful, and that I needed to be taught a lesson. He grabbed me and began rubbing his junk against my body and tried to remove my blouse, exposing my flat chest. Meanwhile, I was kicking and screaming. He put his full mouth wide open onto my face like a carp. I had smelled his breath for so many months, but now I was living the nightmare, slobbering all over my face. Then, for a minute, I was terrified of this man's actions. I honestly thought he would swallow my face. You see, I hadn't even had my first kiss yet. I began to latch onto his lower lip and bit as hard as I could. He stumbled back, letting me loose from his tight grip, and I noticed the obvious blood dripping from his mouth. My survival instinct was to continue to scream and for him to unlock the door, when miraculously someone busted the door. It was my beautiful history teacher, Mrs. B, and the campus security guard. I was crying, half-dressed, but I had been rescued. I was reassured by the school officials that I would never see Mr. Miranda again, and that my family was surprised at this, but happy that the monster was gone. If something feels off, listen to your gut, because that could save you from going through what I endured. Don't let anyone steal your innocence or make you do things you're uncomfortable with. And this being beautiful American culture had nothing to do with the behavior of this awful man. In case you're wondering, I became successful and graciously accepted a fully paid scholarship at a good university and graduated with a master's degree in science. But don't be afraid to speak up. I know it's hard to communicate sensitive stuff to others, but what you have to lose is much more precious and valuable. Believe me, you're worth it. And to all the Mr. Mirandas in the world and the man who smeared my innocence, I have no respect for people like you. And thanks to you, I can scan a creeper and stalker miles away. I'm a 40-something-year-old man from the South, raised Southern Baptist, and my faith has been my foundation for as long as I can remember. But what happened over the last few Sundays has really shaken me to my core. I work part-time overnight security on weekends. It's an easy enough job, usually uneventful. That is until about 4 weeks ago. It was around 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning, just 3 hours before my shift ended, when the phone rang. It was Todd, the guy who relieves me at 7 a.m. every weekend. "Hey bud, I'm gonna be a few hours late. Car trouble." "Yeah, alright, just get here as soon as you can." That threw off my whole day. Normally I'd drive home, shower, change, and make it to church on time. But with Todd running late, there was no way I'd make it. "It's fine, I'll just go to the night service," I told myself. By the time Todd finally arrived, I just wanted to go home and sleep. At about 4 miles from work, I noticed something. A sign on the side of the road. Christ Community Church, 6 miles this way, and an arrow pointing left. I'd never noticed it before, but that wasn't surprising. I didn't take that road during the daytime, really. Why not? Church is church, right? I turned down the narrow country road, which twisted and curved through dense trees. Then I saw it. A white wooden church, pristine, and behind it stood a small, ancient graveyard with headstones, their engravings too worn to read from a distance. But something about it felt odd. I parked and went inside. The interior smelled faintly of old wood and something floral like dried roses. The moment I stepped inside, the congregation turned and looked at me in unison. What immediately caught my attention were their clothes. The men in dark suits, polished shoes, and stiff-collared shirts. The women wore long dresses, lace gloves, and and hats adorned with flowers and ribbons and the like. Even the children were dressed in button-up shirts, knee-high socks, polished leather shoes. It looked odd, especially for me, still in my work uniform. I shook off the discomfort and took a seat near the back. The sermon was beautiful, and the hymns sounded like they'd been sung to perfection, like they'd been rehearsed for years. Once the service ended, the congregation remained rooted in their seats, and the pastor, a lean, tall man with deep-set eyes and a warm but unsettling smile, walked directly up to me. "Welcome, brother. I'm Pastor Paul. We're so pleased to have you here." His voice was smooth. The others stayed seated, their eyes lingering on me. "We have a business meeting this morning," Pastor Paul continued, his smile never faltering. "But we would love to have you join us next Sunday." Something about the way he said it felt more like a command than an invitation. I shook his hand, nodded, and left. The second Sunday, I'm going to be honest, I don't know why I went back, but something about the place pulled me in. When I arrived, the church looked exactly the same. The parking lot was empty when I pulled up, but the pews were filled. And when I stepped in, every head turned in unison. But this time their expression was warmer, as if they recognized me now. Some came up to me, shaking my hand. "It's good to see you again. Are you thinking of joining us?" Their voices soft. The service was the same as last time, similar hymns, sung in perfect harmony, and at the end Pastor Paul greeted me once more, his smile never wavering. "I knew you'd return." Each week it was roughly the same, as church can sometimes be. And they became more welcoming. But there was something in my gut that told me I shouldn't keep going back, which was weird because I'd always gone to church. Then that morning, my pastor Gary called me. He went on to tell me that he'd missed me in church and asked if everything all right. I'd known this man for a long time, so it wasn't unusual for him to be concerned, to make sure nothing had happened to me. I explained the situation with work and how I was just exploring that church for a short time. He asked me the name of the church, and I told him it was Christ Community Church. Then I heard him go, and take a long pause. I asked him what the problem was. He said he wasn't sure, but as far as he knew, that church had disappeared. It had been swallowed by an earthquake over 100 years ago. I laughed over the phone and said that maybe they'd rebuilt it. I said I'd see him again next Sunday, and thanks for the concern, and it was pretty much the end of the conversation. But the next day I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, so I went back. After work I drove to the road where church had been. But when I reached the spot, there was nothing. Just a field with fences and trees that were never there before. Confused, I parked and stepped out the car looking around. It really should have been here. I had no explanation for where this church had gone. I thought maybe it only appeared on Sundays, but I didn't want to tempt fate, and decided never to return. But this incident has kept in the back of my mind for a long time. What the hell was I dealing with?
When I was 16, I got a summer job working at one of the largest cemeteries in the Midwest. It wasn't exactly glamorous work, but it paid decently well and I got to work outside. Another guy around my age was hired too, and the two of us spent most of our days walking the paved paths with trash bags, picking up litter, and blowing away artificial flowers. Nothing heavy, just keeping things neat so that the groundskeepers could focus on landscaping. The place itself was beautiful, almost like a park. It had winding roads, big trees, quiet benches, and locals used it for dog walking and jogging. Tourists would even stop by sometimes because of the old architecture and historical graves. But with all that foot traffic came a lot of trash. It was one warm afternoon, and we were working our way through the eastern section, the part with rows of older mausoleums tucked under the shade of some small oaks. We turned a corner onto a narrower lane that ran alongside one of the larger stone buildings, and that's when we saw her. A woman in maybe her late 60s or early 70s, standing quietly with her back against the side of the mausoleum. She wasn't doing anything, just staring at a nearby family plot. What caught our attention right away was how she was dressed. She wore a long, high-waisted skirt with a patterned blouse tucked in neatly. Over that, she had a knitted cardigan, despite it being close to 85 degrees. Her hair was done up in a way that reminded me of old photos from the late 1970s, soft curls pinned back. Not messy, but very deliberate. She looked up like she'd stepped out of another decade, and she was holding a teacup. Not a bottle of water, not a thermos, a porcelain teacup, with a little saucer in her other hand. It was delicate and floral, something you'd expect to see on your grandma's china cabinet, and we slowed down as we walked by. She noticed us and gave us a polite smile and lifted her hand in a slow wave. The guy I worked with nodded back, and we gave her a quick little hello. Nothing strange was said, but as soon as we passed I whispered, "That was weird." He didn't say anything at first, just turned back to glance at her. But she was no longer there. She hadn't walked around a corner. She was just gone. We stopped and actually walked back to look around the mausoleum. It was solid stone, no gaps, no nearby paths, and the door was locked. There's nowhere she could have gone that we wouldn't have seen or heard her. We exchanged one of those looks that meant, did that just really happen? And shrugged it off as best we could and kept working. A few days later we were back at the equipment shed getting fresh travel bags when we ran into one of the groundskeepers, an older guy who had worked there forever. We chatted for a minute, and I casually brought up the woman we'd seen. As soon as I described her, he smiled like he'd been waiting for us to say something. "Did she have a teacup?" We both said yes, kinda surprised. "Oh yeah, you saw the lady." Apparently she'd been seen by staff and visitors for years, always in the same spot, and always looking at the same group of graves. According to the groundskeeper, it was the resting place of a man and two sons who died there in the early 80s. The woman's headstone shows that she passed away in 2002, and locals think she might have visited them often when she was alive, maybe even daily. No one's really sure how they died, but the dates are all the same for the father and sons. The weirdest part? People only ever see her for a few seconds. She never speaks or moves, and is always gone without a sound. I never saw her again, but that brief moment stuck with me. It wasn't exactly scary, just unsettling in a quiet way, like we walked into someone else's memory and didn't belong there. This happened a few years ago in early April. I had planned a 2-day solo canoe trip down the Current River in Missouri. If you've never been, it's a spring-fed river winding through thick woods and limestone cliffs. Absolutely gorgeous and peaceful. It cuts through a valley with a massive rain basin, something I didn't fully appreciate until it was too late. I knew it was going to rain. The forecast called for steady showers, but I'd paddled in worse. I figured the water might rise a foot or two, maybe 3 at most, nothing I hadn't dealt with before. It started drizzling in the morning and I pushed off. The river was calm, the trees just starting to leaf out, and I had the whole place to myself. By evening the drizzle had turned into real rain, relentless, cold and soaking. It never let up. By the second night I was exhausted and wet to the bone. I pitched my tent on a gravel bar that stood 6 feet above the waterline, a perfect little spot. I ate something cold from a can and crawled into my sleeping bag and passed out to the sound of rain drumming on tent. But at about 4 a.m. I woke up. Something felt wrong.
At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized the ground beneath me was moving. The floor of my tent was undulating like a waterbed. I slapped on my headlamp and unzipped the flap. The entire gravel bar was submerged. What had been 6 feet above the river was now a tiny 3-inch island and shrinking. The current river had swollen overnight into something unrecognizable, brown, fast, and roaring like a freight train in the dark. The trees along the bank were knee-deep in water, and my gear was floating inside the tent. I scrambled to drag everything, what I could carry, into the canoe, and paddled to the highest patch of ground I could find, a narrow ridge barely above the flood. I spent the next hour in the half-light trying to boil coffee on a camp stove balanced inside the canoe. I was cold, shaking, soaked, but still too groggy to understand how bad it had gotten. Then the sun came up, and that's when the real fear set in. A noise that was low and steady began building downstream, something like a distant avalanche. I looked up and saw it. A cluster of 4 fully grown trees, roots, trunks, everything, were floating towards me. Not logs, but whole trees bobbing in the water like toothpicks carried by a flood current. Behind them, the gravel bar I'd slept on was being churned up and sucked under, stones rolling like coins in a blender. It was all in slow motion and I had nowhere to go. Just me in a canoe, cornered between a ridge and a death trap made of bark and root. One of the trees spun, turning sideways, coming right for me. The river was going to crush me like an insect. And then, by nothing short of a miracle, another tree struck it first. The two collided, and the second tree caught the first on its tangled roots, redirecting it just enough that it rotated away from me. If it hadn't, I wouldn't be here sharing this story with you. I don't know if it was luck or the river showing mercy, but I sat in that canoe for another hour, shaking, watching the water consume everything I'd stood on the night before. When people talk about nature being beautiful, they forget you can turn savage without warning. The river doesn't care if you checked the weather. It doesn't care if you're an experienced camper or just looking for peace. When it wants to take, it takes everything. And if you're lucky, it leaves you with just enough to paddle away. A few years back, I was a public speaker for a while, and had some local success, and became well known for motivational speaking. One night, I received a text from a random number. They told me a bunch of information about myself that they shouldn't know. I then texted my closest friend at the time with screenshots of the weird number texting me. Then, the number told me to stop texting my friend, as in, they somehow knew I was messaging them. They then messaged him with his full name and address, and told me not to tell someone else about our conversation, and basically blackmailed my friend to stay quiet about it. They went on to claim they weren't trying to threaten me, but were rather really impressed by me and wanted me to join them. I finally just blocked their number, and haven't heard anything since, but it was honestly one of the weirdest interactions I've ever had. I'm a 28-year-old woman living in Finland, with my husband, 10 years my senior, in my parents' detached house, nestled in the Finnish countryside, surrounded by vast fields and dense forests. My little brother also lives with us. Lately, though, strange things have begun happening. Objects disappearing and then mysteriously reappearing in the same spot, hours or even minutes later. At first, it started with the small, everyday things. Hair ties, keys, the usual suspects. But one incident earlier in the summer really stands out. It was late at night, around 1 a.m., and since I'm a night owl, I was in bed watching YouTube, just passing time. I was comfortable, winding down, when suddenly I heard the TV in the living room turn on full blast. The sound was loud. I thought for sure it would wake up the whole house. I jumped out of bed in a panic, thinking maybe one of our cats had stepped on the remote, as this has happened more than once. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 1:30. Everyone else should have been asleep, but I could still hear the TV clearly. As I walked down the hallway, the sound got louder, and when I reached the living room, my mum was snoring away on the sofa, completely unaware. She's a heavy sleeper, and I couldn't help but wonder how she wasn't stirred by the noise. I flipped on the lights and looked around the room. The TV was blaring some ridiculous commercial at full volume, and there was no way I could turn it down without finding the remote. I began checking every surface, tables, chairs, under the sofa, between the cushions, everywhere, but it was simply nowhere to be found. I spent what felt like an eternity, at least 5 minutes, searching. All the while the TV blasted ads louder than I could bear. Our TV doesn't have any physical buttons for power or volume, and the power cord was hidden behind a heavy shelf, so I was stuck. Frustrated and slightly embarrassed by the noise, I finally decided to wake up my mum. I nudged her awake and asked her where she'd last seen the remote. Still half asleep, she groggily told me that my dad had left it on the backrest of the sofa. Now the sofa is L-shaped, with sturdy armrests and backrests that create little alcoves between the cushions, so it seemed strange that it would disappear. But we began searching anyway. We both started flipping through cushions, moving blankets and turning over pillows. My mum even pulled up the sofa's slip cover, thinking it had slipped under it. And that's when something strange happened. One of our cats, a fluffy white thing with a mischievous streak, jumped up on the backrest of the sofa. She walked a few steps forward, when out of nowhere the remote appeared right on the edge of the backrest, exactly where my mum had said it had been last. I saw it happen with my own eyes. The remote didn't just appear from under the cushions or fall from some hidden crevice. It was as if it materialized in front of me. In that moment, I was frozen. I didn't know what to think. Normally when things disappear and reappear, it's subtle. You glance away for a moment and it's gone, or you find it in an unlikely spot after retracing your steps. But this was different. I hadn't missed it. I had checked that exact spot before the cat jumped up. It was as if it hadn't been there and all of a sudden it just appeared. My mum, of course, brushed it off as nothing more than us not noticing it before. She's pretty logical, and in the half-sleep days she didn't think too much of it. But that explanation didn't sit right with me. If it had been just me, maybe I would have bought it. But we were both in the room, searching for the same thing. And it wasn't like I was imagining it. I was wide awake, and the noise from the TV was enough to keep me on edge. And I know it sounds crazy, and I've been trying to figure out a rational explanation. I don't do drugs, the house doesn't have a gas leak or carbon monoxide, we had the place checked and nothing unusual has come up. But every now and again something else goes missing. And when I'm about to give up, it often shows up again in the most unexpected of places. Something strange is happening, and I can't shake the feeling that there is more to it than just a simple mix-up or misplacing things. It feels off, like we're caught in some kind of loop or glitch. I'm starting to wonder if it's not the house that's odd, but reality itself.
When I was in college, I took a part-time job as an administrative assistant at Willowbrook Memorial Park, a Jewish cemetery nestled in some wooded suburbs. For the most part, it was quiet work, filing, scheduling, handling paperwork for plots, and occasionally answering emotional phone calls with as much grace as a 19-year-old can. Willowbrook followed traditional Sabbath hours, so the gates were always locked tight from Friday sundown to Saturday night, with no exceptions. We always wrapped up by 3:30 on Fridays to respect the observance, but sometimes the office staff lingered a little too long to get a few last-minute things done. That Friday, just a week before Passover, I stayed late with Nancy, the office manager. We were processing payments and double-checking funeral schedules when we heard a sharp knock echo through the otherwise silent grounds. It sounded like it came from one of the iron entrance gates. Nancy frowned. No one should be here. We went to gate 6, the side entrance near the older plots, and we saw her. An elderly woman stood just outside the bars, no more than 5 feet from us. She must have been in her 70s, wearing a navy blue dress with tiny embroidered roses. Her silver hair was pinned back with elegant clips, and her gloves looked like they belonged to another time. She wasn't frantic, but her voice trembled when she spoke. "I need to go back. Please, I need to go back before sundown." Nancy asked where her car was, and the woman didn't reply. She just kept looking past us towards the cemetery grounds. We explained we weren't allowed to open the gates without the cemetery manager, who had already left for the day. She grew more insistent. "They're waiting. He said I wouldn't be long." It was strange, and it started to scare me a little. Nancy called Mr. Brenner, the manager, and he sighed when she told him and reluctantly agreed to come back and unlock the gate. 15 minutes later he arrived, annoyed but professional, asking, "Where's the urgent visitor then?" We turned to point her out, but no one was there. The gate stood empty. The road beyond it was just as deserted, no car, no footsteps, just the rustling of trees and the hum of power lines overhead. Nancy and I looked at each other. She was right here. Mr. Brenner didn't look amused. "Let me guess, she vanished into thin air?" Nancy suggested checking the security feed. Gate 6 had a camera pointing directly at it, so we went inside and rewound the footage. We saw ourselves clear as day walking to the gate. We watched us speaking to someone just outside the frame, our hands gesturing, our heads nodding. But there was no one else on screen. No woman, no dress. Just the two of us talking to the empty air. Nancy muttered something I didn't catch, and Mr. Brenner laughed like we pulled a prank on him. Cute. Really? We didn't argue, nor try to explain. But after he left, Nancy stared at the video for a long time. "I saw her," she whispered. "I know, I saw her too." We never brought it up again in front of anyone else. But every now and then, if we're working late on a Friday night, we'll check the monitors, just to make sure we don't get another visitor. I was young when it happened, 15, but in many ways still a child. I've always been a little bit paranoid, maybe too aware of how fragile safety really is. The morning before school, I'd said something stupid, something I couldn't take back. I told Sam, my best friend and part-time tormentor, that I was going to walk home through the woods. She had teased me earlier, rolling her eyes and calling me scared of everything. The words were light on her tongue, but they burned in my mind, and I wanted to prove I could be a brave girl, just once. The woods weren't even that bad. They cut a quiet line behind our school and led almost directly to my backyard, after a maybe 15-minute walk. So after the final bell rang, I shouldered my backpack and stepped off the sidewalk into the tree line. The first few minutes were fine. The path was narrow and tangled in roots and crumbling leaves that gave way with every footfall. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No cars, no students, just the brittle breath of the forest pressing in around me. And then suddenly I realized I couldn't see the school anymore. I was swallowed by this rising panic and kept going, trying to laugh to myself. "You're fine, Maggie. It's just the woods." I picked up my pace, careful not to trip over the mess of sticks and rocks littering the trail. And that's when I heard a sound, a low, wet moan. I froze mid-step. My first thought, embarrassingly, was Sam. Maybe she'd followed me to try and mess with me. That was so like her. I rolled my eyes and called out, trying to be brave. "I'm not scared of you, Sam." I stepped around 2 large rotting logs, ready to catch her crouching behind them, with that dumb grin of hers. But it wasn't Sam.
It was a man. A man I didn't know. Filthy and disheveled, crouched low against the wood with his jeans around his ankles and one hand pumping between his legs. His face was smeared with dirt, beard patchy and wild, and clothes hanging off him like rags. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and grinned. Then he moaned my name. Maggie. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. My body betrayed me. It locked me in place while my brain screamed to run. I stood there like a broken statue staring at him. He smiled wider, teeth yellow and wet, like he could see straight into my soul. And then I ran, crushing through the underbrush, stumbling, falling and scrambling back, the world a smear of green and brown. A scream tore through the trees, raw and primal. And behind me I heard him scream my name again. I didn't look back. I burst out of the trees and into my yard, lungs burning, legs shaking, and I ran straight into the house, slammed the door behind me and locked it, and threw myself into my room. I didn't tell my parents. I was too scared and too ashamed. Ashamed that I froze. Ashamed that I didn't fight. Ashamed that in some twisted way that it happened to me at all. So, when my mum knocked and my dad asked what was wrong, I said nothing. I stayed locked in my room all evening, curled up on my bed, trying to forget what I saw, trying to make sense of the fact that a man I had never met knew my name. Eventually, somehow, I fell asleep. And it was just before midnight when I woke again. A sound dragged me back to consciousness, a low grunt. At first I thought I was simply dreaming, but then I heard it again. He was at my window. His filthy face was framed in the opening of my window which he had slid open. He wasn't inside, not yet, just leaning in, arms resting on the sills. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. My limbs were locked in ice. You make me so hard, baby. The words broke something in me. I started sobbing violently, gasping for air. Still, I couldn't get my body to move. My BB gun was right there on the floor beside my bed, but it might as well have been a mile away. He laughed, soft and breathy, like this was all some kind of joke to him. Please go away, I finally choked out. He mimicked me in a shrill, mocking voice. Please go away, and then laughed again. And then he began climbing in. I jolted my body back to life. I screamed, and he flinched, lost his grip, and fell backwards out the window. I heard him crash into the bushes, then saw him bolt across the yard and disappear into the dark. My parents burst into my room. I was still screaming and pointing wildly at the open window, screaming that there was a man inside. My dad didn't hesitate. He limped straight through the window after him, yelling into the night. But it was too late. The man was gone. Police were called, and when they arrived, they searched the area. That's when they found the nest. He had been living in the storage loft above our garage. Blankets, wrappers, even a few empty bottles. A human predator, hiding just yards away from where I'd slept. After that night, he never came back. The police never caught him, but I've never felt safe again. 2 years have passed, but I still check the locks. I still keep my windows shut no matter how hot it gets. I still jump at shadows and panic when I hear noises at night. I've never set foot in the woods since, and I never will. My theory? I think he heard me and Sam talking that morning. Heard her teasing me. Heard me say I'd walk through the woods. We passed by the garage on our way to her car. He must have been in the loft then, just listening. I think he went into the woods that afternoon knowing I'd be there, and I think he was waiting for me. I've never felt more wrong in my own skin. I still don't understand why it happened, but I know this fear isn't irrational. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you alive. I was 15 when this happened. My family had taken the RV deep into the woods for a camping trip with my aunt, uncle, and cousins. I was the oldest kid, and with a solid 2-year gap between me and the others, I felt adrift, too old for their games and too young to hang out with the adults. But everything changed when I reconnected with some teens we'd met on past trips. Within an hour, it was like we'd always been friends. That night, the adults suggested a game of manhunt. Flashlights were passed out, teams split into runners and hunters, and I ended up with the runners, which gave us a 5-minute head start to hide anywhere in the pitch-dark woods. Earlier that day, we found a strange little path, a tunnel through thick brush that looked more like an animal track than a trail. Narrow and low. You had to crouch or crawl through it. I remembered it as the hunters counted down. While the others scattered, I ducked into the path, moving on my hands and knees, twigs scraping my arms and branches tangling in my hair. As I slid further in, heart pounding. Eventually the hunters passed nearby, their beams sweeping over the trail entrance but never spotting me. I adjusted deeper into the thicket, trying to remain silent. Then I saw a side trail, almost invisible, half covered in moss and branches. I crawled in, curious. It opened into a small hollow, and there, crumpled in dirt, was the naked body of a young woman, pale, still, and bloodied. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. My body locked up and I just stared. Her eyes were open and unblinking, and staring straight through me. My knees soaked in something thick and dark. Then I heard movement, heavy steps, panting. Someone was coming down the narrow trail. I whispered, and the footsteps stopped. Then they picked up speed. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, and by some miracle the man didn't find the hollow. I heard him lumber past the entrance, dragging something behind him. Metal chinked, soft and sharp, like knives shifting in a bag. And then I ran. I tore out of the brush like a wild animal, snapping branches and stomping leaves. He must have heard. His breathing grew louder as he chased me, and I didn't dare look back. My legs barely worked, numb with fear. I slipped on roots and rocks, and somehow I made it back to the main trail, screaming like hell. Lights flicked on, faces appeared, voices called, and I collapsed in camp, trembling, trying to explain what I saw. The adults went dead quiet, then panicked. My mum and aunt sprinted into the woods screaming for the others, and within seconds all the kids were back in camp safely. Police arrived soon after. They found a man creeping down the trail, knife in hand. Nearby, a black garbage bag full of saws and bloody tools. I don't remember much after that, just the nightmares and how I'd nearly died that night.
I worked as a cemetery groundskeeper for a while in my hometown. It's a small place with just over 5,000 people. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, or at least they know of you. And the job itself wasn't glamorous, but I liked it. Quiet, steady, and you learn a lot about people by reading their headstones. So one morning I was assigned to prepare a cremation burial. A woman called Evelyn Harper had passed away, and her final request was to be buried with her husband, Walter Harper, who died back in 2014. So I dug the hole where Walter's ashes were already resting and left it open for the family, who would be arriving later to complete the ceremony. The office staff said they'd be back soon, told me to hang around, so I did. I lit a cigarette and sat down, leaning my back against Walter's headstone. After a minute or two I heard a voice, old and weathered, like it had been carried on the winds for decades. "You shouldn't smoke," it said. I didn't even think about it. I didn't even answer. I was just like, "Yeah, I know." I carried on smoking my cigarette casually. And then, a moment later, the voice said again, "Are you burying Evelyn?" "Yes, sir," I said. And then the tone changed instantly from casual to pure joy. "She's finally coming. I've been waiting so long." He began saying how happy he was and how he'd waited for her. He spoke like that for a few minutes while I finished my cigarette. When I stamped on it and put it out, I was finally ready to confront this guy who was chatting to me. And when I turned around to look, there was no one else in the cemetery. The voice, gone. And then I saw the headlights. The family was arriving. I wiped a few quiet tears from my face, not tears from fear or sadness, just something like peace. I got to witness something deeply moving, yet entirely inexplicable. Before I closed the box with Evelyn's ashes, I left a few of my trade beads beneath it, just a small personal gift for their reunion. The family saw my eyes were red and asked if I knew her, and I said, only from her husband, and walked away. Later that week, I was trimming around the graves, and I stopped by the Harper's headstone. Right then, a soft breeze hit my ears, and I swear it almost sounded like laughter. Then silence. There was another grave I visited often, Miss Marlene. She used to babysit my sister and I when we were little. We loved her like family, and she loved the hell out of us. Always said it in that way too. "I love the hell out of you two." She and her husband ran a junkyard. My sister and I would spend hours exploring it, climbing over rusty cars, pretending to be pirates. When dinner was ready, Marlene would ring this old iron triangle and yell for us in that tone to get in here now or I'm feeding the dog. She passed away sadly in 2003. When I started working at the cemetery years later, I made it a habit to leave flowers at her grave. Eventually, I found her triangle in the ruins of the old junkyard, cleaned it up, and hung it beside her headstone, along with a few old yard decorations I remembered from her porch. One evening I was working late, and that's when I heard it. The ding of the triangle. No breeze, no wind to speak of, and no one around. Just that sound. I looked around, but there was no one there. That's when I heard something that made my blood run cold and froze me to the spot. "Dinner's ready, sweetheart. Get your butt in here." I dropped my tools and ran. The next day, I sat next to her headstone like I used to sit at her kitchen table. I stayed there for about half an hour, not saying much, just remembering, laughing a little, and crying a little more. Then I gave that headstone a hug and finished my day strong. I never heard a peep from that part of the graveyard after that.
When my grandmother passed away from pneumonia in 2017, she left us an old estate far out in the country, deep in the south, an area notorious for its brutal history with slavery in the plantations that scarred the land for centuries. My grandmother had lived there alone for about 5 years before she passed. She inherited the estate from her nephew. He was 59 when he passed, and my parents had visited a few times, but I never had caught up with college and internships during the summer, so when the estate officially became ours, I decided that after graduating, I'd spend the summer there. I wanted to renovate the house, work on landscaping, and install a small solar panel system. Grandma had been running the place on an old gas generator, and since I was planning a career in solar energy, it seemed like the perfect project, especially with the $150K she left us as seed money. The moment I left the main highway and started down the gravel roads, I should have sensed something was off. Mum later told me Grandma never drove. She got groceries delivered and kept to herself most of the time. To get to the estate, I had to navigate miles of pothole-riddled dirt roads. The driveway itself was about 500 yards long, lined with gnarled old trees whose branches bent inward, their thick canopy blocking out sunlight even at high noon. The trees seemed to lean close, as if trying to watch whoever approached. When I pulled up to the house, it was a nightmare of neglect. Spanish moss draped over every surface like ghostly cobwebs. Weeds choked the flower beds, briars crawled at the porch. The house looked like it had been swallowed by the wilderness. I came alone, of course, just me, a backpack with basic supplies, some firewood and a camera to document the damage. I planned to cook simple meals over the fire, rice, hot dogs, things that didn't require electricity. I was eager, excited even. Creepy or not, I was logical and never afraid of the dark. The day passed uneventfully as I explored. I found the old well, rummaged through the attic's forgotten relics, carved dolls, dusty antiques with cracked faces, and I discovered a rotting cellar, likely used in the summer months to keep food cool. Out back, near the tree line, I spotted a cluster of stones that at first looked like boulders, but they weren't. They were old gravestones, worn by time and mostly illegible. I counted 27. But the cluster disappeared into the thick brush. I didn't dare venture further. Ticks and snakes likely lurked there. But I wondered how many more graves the overgrowth concealed. As night fell, I built a fire just outside the front porch. Instinctively, I positioned it as far from the graveyard as I could, a vague unease I barely registered at the time. The firelight flickered against the twisted trees lining the driveway, turning their branches into jagged teeth in the dark. The trees stretched overhead like a monstrous maw. The long driveway, a throat, that disappeared into pitch black nothingness. The half moon barely pierced the canopy, casting an eerie glow. Then I noticed something. Through the smoke and flickering flames, there was a figure moving down the driveway. It wasn't just a shadow. It seemed darker than darkness itself, with an almost unnatural shimmer, like a black hole bending light around it. My breath caught. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it directly down the driveway. The beam cut through the night, and the figure was gone. Just the dirt road, the trees, the silence. I kept glancing out, but the figure never reappeared. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe smoke or a passing cloud. But the unease grew. I felt eyes on me, a watching presence. I checked my phone. Signal was still there, thank God. I went inside and chose a guest room on the second floor at the end of a long hallway, away from Grandma's bedroom. The mattress was lumpy but surprisingly comfortable, and I quickly fell asleep. At around 2 a.m., I woke to a low moan, distant, haunting almost inside my head. I thought I was dreaming until the moan escalated into a heart-wrenching wail mixed with sharp, echoing claps and distant screams. Panic surged. I bolted out of bed, creeping towards the stairs. The sound seemed to be coming from outside. I pressed my face to a window and scanned the yard and driveway. Nothing. Silence. No movement, no light. No signs of anyone or anything. My heart pounded. Was I losing it? I checked every window on both floors, all still, all dark. And after 30 minutes, exhausted and terrified, I was settled on the sofa in the living room. The house's call. Grandma's bedroom was down a short hall from there. Just as I started to drift off, I heard it again. A soft creak from the hallway, then a whisper so faint it was barely audible. But I knew that voice. It was my grandmother's, and one desperate word. Run. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, flew down the stairs, and was outside in seconds. I jumped into my truck, hit the gas and tore down that devilish driveway. The trees seemed alive. Shadows gathered under their branches like hundreds of blackened hands, reaching out. The further I went, the more shadows emerged. I hit a massive pothole on the back road and blew a tire, but I didn't care. I floored the accelerator until I reached a run-down motel, the kind of place you pray is empty, and never have I felt so safe in my life. I never returned.
When I was 20, I moved up to New Jersey with my parents to help take care of my grandparents. Grandma had brain cancer, so she was at the doctor a lot, along with my mum, brother, and grandpa. My dad was usually driving a truck. That meant a lot of time alone at my grandparents' house. Their house was a frickin' dream house. 6 bedrooms, 3 full bathrooms. The upstairs had its own TV, living room, and kitchen. Downstairs was even more massive, with its own TV room, a separate living room / dry bar area, and if that wasn't enough, it had a full basement. I had been in the house a lot in the past for holidays, but until we moved there, I hadn't actually spent any time alone in the house. One day I had just gotten off work and made it to the house. Grandma always brought me White Castle frozen burgers and Hungry Man dinners. She kept them in the deep freeze in the basement. I showered off from work, got into my chill, comfy clothes, and decided it was time to eat. I went downstairs to grab some food, and as soon as my feet landed on the bottom step, the door closed behind me. I quickly turned around to get the hell out the basement, but as soon as I reached for the doorknob, the door creaked open. And that was my first experience there. It's important to note that upstairs had a long hallway that all the rooms broke off from. It had the original hardwood from when the house was built in the late 50s, and every footstep could be heard throughout the house with loud creaks and pops. Bowed boards were pushed back down into place as you walked. Another time while alone, I was downstairs digging through movies to watch in the first TV room. The TV room was cozy and warm. One side was a complete row of windows that let the sun in and lit up the nicotine-stained walls and the pile of VHS tapes I was rifling through. As I dug through the tapes, I heard the sound of someone casually walking upstairs. It was kind of comforting because I figured Mum was home, or maybe my aunt came over. I didn't really pay it much mind. I continued digging through the tapes until I found Major Pain, one of my all-time favorites, which I decided to watch upstairs in the TV room that I usually hang out in. As I was walking back through the house to get to the stairwell, I heard the walking upstairs again. It was light and casual, heading in my direction. I topped the stairs expecting to see Mum, but no one was there. I looked in every room and bathroom upstairs trying to find anyone, but there wasn't anyone there. There's only one set of stairs upstairs, and it lands right outside the upstairs TV room, so it's impossible not to see or hear anyone who comes up while you're in that room. I had been watching the movie for about an hour without any disturbance. I was a little freaked out by the unexplained footsteps, but I chalked it up to the old house settling, when all of a sudden from the far side of the hallway, the side furthest away from the stair set and from me, I heard the steps. They were coming my way. This made the hair on my neck stand up. I knew there was no one there except for me. It didn't sound like the house creaking like old houses tended to do. These were clear-cut footsteps. One by one, they landed at a slow but constant pace, heading my way. They kept going until just a few steps from the doorway, and then stopped. I mustered every ounce of courage I had. I got up and leaned out the door. From the doorway, the main stairwell was on my left, and the hallway led down to the other rooms on my right. I looked down the hall to the right where the steps had been coming from, and saw nothing. In the very last door on the right, the doorknob slowly turned until it clicked. That room had thick, padded carpet, so it took some effort to push the door open. After the doorknob clicked, the door pushed in a few inches. I went back to the TV room, locked the door behind me, turned the TV up and tried to chill out. On another day after work, I had come home and eaten way too much, so I decided to take a nap in the upstairs TV room. That was the comfiest couch in the house. A brown, fuzzy couch that smelled of Newports like my grandparents smoked. It made it extra cozy because it smelled like them. Anyway, I fell asleep for about an hour until I heard a scream come from downstairs. It sounded like a little girl. It was loud enough to wake me up, and I figured it was either a dream or maybe Grandpa was home and had the downstairs TV cranked. I shut the TV off and went downstairs to check it out. I looked through all the rooms before coming to the downstairs TV room. I opened the door, and it was empty, just like all the other rooms. Then upstairs I heard those footsteps again, but this time they were running down the hall, and the little girl's screams happened again, only this time from upstairs. Eventually I told my aunt about all of this, especially the footsteps. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "That's happened my whole life." I'm talking to my dad about it, and he said it's been a thing for as long as they lived there. They gave the ghost a name, and she said she was a woman, but I can't remember the name now. When the area was being zoned for houses in the 50s, it was found to have Indian burial mounds. The contractors dug up these mounds and buried all the bones and artifacts in a quarry outside of town. And Grandpa said weird stuff had always happened since they moved in. Me and my brother were in the basement playing one day. Like most days, we were home alone. The basement was packed with all kinds of random stuff my grandparents had collected from over the years. We dug around and got scared witless by some mannequins my grandma had. We got over our fright and started playing with them. We dug around behind where they were all stashed and found a hole in the wall. It was about 2 feet and round, and looked like someone had broken the concrete with a pickaxe to get through the ground beyond it. The hole went in for about 3 or 4 feet, and then seemed to end, but the basement was honestly too dark to tell. We decided to grab a flashlight and look in it. As soon as we shone the light down the hole, a mighty gust of air came flying out at us. It kind of smelled like it does after it rains. It hit us so hard it blew our hair back and turned some of the mannequins on their stands. And we never went to that part of the basement again.
This happened around 17 years ago during summer break. My friend and I went to visit another friend who was staying in this tiny remote village in Belarus for the summer. The house was his grandparents', and the whole place felt super isolated. Honestly, it was actually a lot of fun at first. We went swimming at a nearby lake every day, and at night we'd stay up late just sitting by the water, listening to the kind of deafening silence you only get in the countryside, and talking for hours. During the day, we'd go mushroom picking, explore the area, take pictures, and just make some really good memories together. We stayed for a few weeks, but then one of my friends had to leave early because of some family stuff. The only way out was a bus that came twice a week, and she missed it. So she came back to our friend's place and asked if we could walk her to a nearby highway to try and hitch a ride. The main road was about 7 miles away, so we started walking. When we got there, it was midweek, and no cars passed at all. Guess most people were at work or in the city. As it got later, we decided just to walk back. On the way back, we passed through a few neighboring villages that were half abandoned. Honestly, it was pretty creepy, but we kept to ourselves, entertained by singing and joking around and keeping the fear at bay. It was getting dark, and we still had 4 miles left. Then we ended up on this road with dense forest on both sides. Suddenly we started hearing noises coming from the trees. It was pitch dark, and honestly quite unsettling. We tried to joke about it, but deep down we all felt something was off. Then my friend pointed, and we saw 2 huge yellow eyes staring at us from the trees. We just kept walking in silence for a bit, until one of us nervously said, "Must be some kind of weird fireflies messing with us." We laughed, but we all knew those definitely were not fireflies. Keep in mind this was way before cell phones, so there was no way to call anyone. We just had to keep moving back to safety. As we got closer to the village, two of us heard a female voice coming from the forest. We looked at each other, both realizing we heard it, while the third friend was talking and didn't notice. I got goosebumps. It sounded so real. And the fact I wasn't the only one who heard it made it even creepier. We didn't say anything until we got back to the house. Here is where it gets stranger. In Slavic folklore, there's not just the Leshi, the spirit of the forest who protects the woods and sometimes plays tricks on people, but also the Rusalka. Rusalki are these mythological female spirits often connected to lakes and rivers. They're usually described as beautiful women with long hair, sometimes said to lure people, especially at night, with their singing or voices. We'd been hanging out at the lake so many nights, and then to hear a mysterious female voice coming from the trees later on, it definitely made us wonder if we'd gotten a little too close to something supernatural. We still joke about those unhinged fireflies, but deep down we all know we saw and heard something we couldn't explain. Between the abandoned houses, the glowing eyes in the forest, and that eerie female voice, it was honestly one of the scariest, strangest experiences of my life. And yeah, I still think about those nights at the lake and wonder what might have been watching or listening to us from the darkness.
I would like to start out by saying that I'm from a small town in Iowa with around 7,000 people. When you grow up in a small town, you become really resourceful at finding things to do for fun, and you make the most of the fun while you're having it. Urban legends are plentiful and always fun to share, and I don't live too far from our capital city. As I got older, I started venturing into it. I made a lot of friends, and they loved hearing stories of growing up in my small town. They found the things we did for fun wild, and they would beg me to take them to a cemetery that was about 40 minutes from my house. It's a place I'd only been to a handful of times, and I will admit it was during the day. I know the area somewhat well, as I've hunted out there and been on a few late-night drives, but by night time it becomes quite creepy. I will state this now. I'm not into the supernatural. If something creepy does happen, I will look for a logical explanation. If you tell me a haunting story, I'll roll my eyes, but there is no explanation for what I'm about to share with you. So one evening, some friends from the city called me, saying they wanted to go to this cemetery, and wanted me to take them there. I agreed. They made it down around 8 p.m. This was in mid-fall, so it was somewhat dark by that time. We stood around having a few smokes and catching up with one another. There were 5 of us. Around 9 p.m. we left. Part of this trip is on a paved highway, but the rest is on limestone gravel roads, about 6, maybe 10 miles at most to the graveyard. We took my friend's new car at the time. It was a few months old, a reddish maroon Pontiac G6. If you've ever driven on a limestone gravel road, your car gets covered in a fine white dust. We made it to the cemetery. The entrance is a large cast iron gate, and we go in. I show them the headstone. It's a very large one from the early 20th century, and it has a very creepy saying on it, something akin to, "Where you are now, I once was, and soon you'll be where I am." Since then I found out it's pretty common on old headstones. My friends agreed yeah, that it was creepy, and they asked if anything had ever happened out there to me. No, not really. My car once overheated driving by, but that was about it. Now this gravestone sits in the last row facing west, and to the south, maybe 50 yards away, is a whole row of children's graves. Small little gravestones just big enough to fit a name on. Well, urban legend says if you run between those gravestones zigzagging through them, you will pass away. My friend starts talking trash, telling me that's the dumbest thing he's ever heard. He yells not to be afraid of any stupid dead babies. I say, I don't know, man. I always heard that so-and-so did it and they were dead a week later. And he calls me an idiot for believing it. He starts running through them, and halfway through, he says he couldn't care less about the supposed curse. But he doesn't complete the whole run and comes walking back. We joke with him and ask if he was too scared to do it, and he said, yeah, I got creeped out halfway through. We went back to the entrance, had a few smokes, shot the breeze for a minute, and I was ready to leave. I hadn't had dinner and was quite hungry. It was around 11 p.m, and we head back to the town I live in. On the south side there's a McDonald's. I pull in, we head inside to have dinner. We left the car under a streetlight, so the car was well lit. And when we got up to it, a friend noticed there were small handprints all over the car. No fewer than 20. They were about the size of a 2-year-old's, but they weren't all the same size, and they all were quite fresh. They were on top of the trunk, on top of the roof. We could see them because they were outlined in the dust from the gravel road. I remember looking really closely, and you could clearly see small fingerprints in the white dust, highlighting every crease. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. There is no explanation. If they were there before we went out, they would have been covered by the dust. We couldn't figure out how a kid would have gotten on top of his car. There were no kids around where the owner of the car lived. Nothing. We tried to come up with a reasonable explanation for them to be there, but nothing made sense. I told my friend who ran through the graves he better watch out. To this day, if you bring it up with him, he won't hear a word. He'll either leave the room or get angry that you brought it up. And it's been near 20 years since it happened.
The Okefenokee Swamp is located mostly in South Georgia and partly in North Florida. I'd been going there since I was a kid. My dad and uncle were avid outdoorsmen, and I grew up learning to love the same things. Now, if the first thing that came to your mind when I said swamp was alligators, you would be correct, and the Okefenokee has some of the biggest around. It may sound super scary to non-southerners, but the old saying really is true. If you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. Canoeing slowly across the dark, tea-colored waters, if you pass too closely to one, it will quietly slink into the murky depths. He's not coming to get you. You've simply interrupted his sunbathing. As elementary school kids in South Georgia, it was kind of a rite of passage to go on the Okefenokee field trip and be led on a guided tour by Okefenokee Joe. Joe was a true outdoorsman, extremely knowledgeable, friendly, good with the kids and funny. A little strange but generally regarded as a good guy. A local legend. He would get that boat closer to the big gator than my dad ever let me. He taught us kids about them. We even got to hear the mating call of some of the males and watch a lot of their behavior up close. He would also show us all the birds, snakes, and other wildlife. The denizens of the swamp were so used to Joe's boat that they didn't flee when he got close. Great memories. Anyhow, fast forward to my adulthood, and I still have a great love for the outdoors. I'd recently gotten married and was successfully getting my wife and stepdaughter into kayaking, camping and hiking. I'd broken them in fairly easy. Calm lakes and beautiful crystal clear springs fed Florida waterways. We'd encountered some gators, but the girls had already become comfortable with the fact that they don't want to hurt humans. I decided it was time to go out to the Okefenokee and show them my childhood swamp stomping grounds. We headed out one weekend, kind of on a whim. I hadn't called ahead to reserve a campsite because I assumed it wouldn't be that busy yet. But I was wrong. Every tent camping site was booked. I was pretty visibly bummed out, so I guess the ranger felt sorry for me. She instructed us to hold on. She was going to check one more thing. When she came back, she had great news. There was a primitive group site available, and if you aren't familiar, these are larger sites that are usually for big groups like Boy Scouts, usually situated away from the main campground areas. They do not have electricity, and we camp 100% primitive all the time, so it wasn't an issue for us. The rangers explained that this particular group site had been closed for 2 seasons due to the road being washed out. They said they had just fixed the road the week before, but hadn't gotten around to relisting the site as available. She offered to sell it to us for a normal fee, instead of the group fee. We paid, and she vaguely shows us on the map how to get to our home for the night. I remember thinking, damn, that's far as hell from the other sites. It's going to be nice and quiet. Perfect. While at the office, we learnt that that evening there was going to be a ranger-guided night paddle. This particular park inside the Okefenokee is a designated dark sky park, meaning there is very little light pollution. I was already excited about showing my family the stars and Milky Way, so getting out onto the water at night and seeing the skies that way sounded sweet. We decided to sign up for the night paddle and headed off to find our campsite. Once we got there, you could tell right away the area hadn't been used in several years. Overgrown, spiderwebs everywhere, and teeming with the usual wildlife. I kind of prefer things this way, so I didn't think twice about it. It was so far from the campgrounds and the main office area, you couldn't hear a single sound of other humans or vehicles. The area was large, so I walked around a bit to find a good spot to set up. I looked back at my map to try and gauge exactly how this little island was shaped, and noticed that what I was seeing and what the map showed didn't quite line up. Whatever, I'm sure I'm just reading it wrong. We set up our camp and just enjoyed the sunshine and the sounds of nature. It was still very early spring, so the hordes of mosquitoes and other various swamp bugs weren't out in full force yet. The bugs in the swamp in summer months could be a horror story of their own. At around 7:30, we loaded the kayaks back into my pickup and headed all the way across the park to the launch area, as our guided paddle was supposed to start at 8. We approached the launch area to unload, and there were a good 15 to 20 people also going out to paddle. Led by a young, enthusiastic ranger, we all slipped off into the water with our headlamps on the red light setting. We exited the small canal we had been traveling in and emerged out into a larger river-type waterway that meandered through the swamp. As we slowly and quietly crept along, cypress trees draped with Spanish moss loomed over us on both sides, with a dramatic orange and pink sunset as their backdrop. The sun finally began disappearing and the stars started to come out. It was absolutely stunning, and still one of my favorite kayaking memories. I'd never actually seen the Milky Way like that before. It was a new moon, dark as could be, and about a mile from our original launch. We all congregated out in the middle of the wide waterway and sat completely still and quiet. The motionless, dark waters of the swamp reflected the skies like a mirror. Thousands of stars and galaxies twinkled above us and below us. It was like being in space. Shooting stars were visible every few minutes. It really was magical. The only artificial light in the sky was the dull glow of Jacksonville, Florida on the horizon, which was about 100 miles to our southeast. And after a while, the ranger snapped all of us out of our trances. It was time to head back. When we were paddling out there, it had been dusk/twilight for most of the trip, with very little light, but enough to kind of silhouette the trees and the branches against the sky, and a slight glimmer on the water. But by now it was pitch black. The ranger told us to switch our headlamps back on to their normal white light setting, so that we could all see well enough to navigate out of the swamp. As each headlamp slowly switched on, and the swamp was illuminated, we were met with hundreds of glowing eyes. Now, as I said earlier, I grew up out here, Gators were nothing new or scary to me at all. However, growing up, we never really stayed out on the water past dark. We would shine our lights out over the water to look at all the eyes, but from dry land, far away from all the beasts. Now I found myself and my little family quite literally pushing past floating gators with our kayaks. They were absolutely everywhere, all over the sides of the channel, as well as blocking our way to the center. The ranger was leading and assuring everyone not to worry. He paddled up towards a huge group of shining eyes ahead of us and pushed right past them. Most of the eyes just disappeared under the water. But the gator directly in the ranger's path thrashed, and his tail actually hit the kayak. Sharp gasps from the group pierced the otherwise quiet southern night air, but the ranger showed zero signs of panic, which was reassuring. We all just trusted the young man that we weren't going to really piss off these gators by kayaking straight into them. And as we went along, the sounds of the gators being bumped by kayaks and thrashing were heard every few minutes. There weren't any other jarring sounds or movements, just the constant calling of frogs, cicadas, and splashing of these disturbed dinosaurs. When we finally turned back into the small channel that led to the launch, there were no more glowing eyes. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't been a bit freaked out, but I can honestly say I wasn't panicking. The ranger being so cool and confident while leading the way made it pretty easy to stay calm. Everyone started to relax again as we neared the launch, and we got out, loaded up our boats, and one by one headed back to our camps. There was a line of red tail lights trailing off towards the main campground, while my wife, daughter, and myself split off alone into the darkness towards the other side of the park where our site was. I do remember that feeling, kind of eerie, that everyone had made it through the gator gauntlet safely with no problems. Now we were laughing about it and remarking on how cool the whole experience was. We were in high spirits, no stress. We had no idea of the terror that would come later that night. We got back to our site at around midnight and were starving. I got a nice fire going while my wife prepared dinner, and the meal finished cooking. Around 1 a.m. we finally all settled down to get comfy by the fire and eat. I hadn't taken 2 bites of my food when the horrifying experience began. The cicadas and frogs were singing, but you tend to drown that out into background noise because it's so constant. Suddenly, out of the calming buzz of their singing, a sound sprung that I will never forget. A low, rumbling, guttural growl, long, deep, and vibrating in our chests. We all froze and looked at each other like, did y'all hear that? Not even 10 seconds later we heard it again. It sounded really close, like right on the other side of the brush we were camping near. The only thing I could honestly relate it to at the time was the growling sound the T-Rex makes in Jurassic Park. As you can imagine, I was terrified. I've been scared in the woods and the swamps. I've seen swamp gas, freaky figures, and heard screams. I've been in the Marine Corps and encountered bears in the Appalachian Mountains. I've explored all kinds of places. When I tell you, I have never been this scared, I mean it. Pure, raw, primordial fear. I immediately told the girls to get into the cab of my pickup. They get into the truck, and I hop into the bed of my truck with my little .357 Magnum drawn. I figured being back there would get me up off the ground and give me a little advantage over whatever was coming. I told the girls to lock the doors and open the little sliding back window so we could communicate. I started frantically shining my flashlight around, aiming my gun along with it. But I see absolutely nothing. We continue to hear the growling coming from one general direction, not getting any softer or louder, just continuously emitting in 3 to 5 second long intervals, every 30 seconds or so. It was coming from the brush right next to our site. I shine my light all over that area but see nothing. Just thick palmetto leaves, underbrush and pine. No movement whatsoever. Then suddenly we hear the sound coming from the complete opposite direction, more towards the open area of our sight. I whip around and shine my light that way, and that's when I notice the dense fog that has settled onto the entire area. It was a damp, sticky and suffocating fog. Almost right away the growling sound was coming back from the original direction. That's when I realized there were two of them, doing a kind of call and answer with each other. That's also when I realized the other sounds of the swamp had gone silent. Nothing but the call and answer of whatever was making these absolutely gut-wrenching sounds. It got deafeningly quiet for a moment. Nothing but the heavy fog, which seemed to have a silent sound of its own. My wife, with a shaky, trembling voice, told me she wanted to leave immediately, and our daughter agreed. Now I was absolutely terrified. However, do not misunderstand this. The thought of us just leaving all of my expensive camping gear behind was somehow more offensive. Not to mention I was getting kind of frustrated. I'm at home in this damn swamp. I know all of the creatures here. I'm comfortable here. It's borderline pissing me off that something out here has me so scared and confused. And I begin to rationalize what could be making this sound. Suddenly it started back up again, but now it sounds like it could be 4 to 5 of them, all growling back and forth to each other, overlapping each other now, coming from all sides. A demonic chorus of deep, rattling, soul-sucking rumbles, not getting any closer or further away, just keeping us closely surrounded. If I'd had to have pooped, I believe I would have done it in my shorts. I kept myself at least somewhat cool by affirming it must be an animal of some kind. I wouldn't even entertain the thought of anything supernatural. My wife kept saying it sounded like a big cat, and while I agreed, I knew that wasn't it. It would have had to have been massive lions or tigers to make that kind of extreme low rumbling growl. I racked my brain for the biggest animal it can be, and kept landing back on alligator. Yet we had just paddled directly through an entire swarm of them, some of them absolutely massive, and they hadn't made a single sound the whole time. No, that couldn't be it. I even had a thought that the young, playful ranger had orchestrated some kind of extravagant practical joke on us poor campers here all alone. Really and truly, I had no idea what it was, and not being able to even see a glimpse so I could take a shot at it to protect my family was very helpless. I really wished I had more words for how it felt. Just blindly standing in the back of the truck, hearing what I could only imagine were the scariest, evilest, most vile things on the planet. Just knowing that they wanted to kill, eat, or otherwise mutilate myself and my family. It felt like an eternity. We'd probably been holed up in the truck for at least 15 minutes by now. It had finally gone quiet again, and I told the girls that we could leave. But I wasn't leaving the gear. I climbed into the cab and started the truck and moved it, positioning it to where I could shine the headlights onto our stuff while I packed it all up. Gun in hand, I began rolling up the tent, gathering all of our stuff and throwing it into the bed of the truck, praying nothing crazy happened like my truck dying or something else, perfectly timed, like that cinematic horror moment. I tried to put on a confident air so as to not scare my family, but in my head I felt so vulnerable, like I was something's prey. The growling hadn't started coming back, and honestly the silence was freaking me out more than anything. That and the fog. I'll never forget how oppressive that fog felt. All of our gear was sopping wet with it, and I swear it was hard to breathe the air. The fire was nothing but a smolder despite the fact it had been roaring bright 20 minutes ago. Just as I was rolling up the very last sleeping mat, one final, closer than before growl shook me to my very core. I snatched that map up and took off running, getting into the truck Duke of Hazzard style and taking off, none of us looking back. I later discovered, once I made it to cell service, that the sounds we were hearing were large male alligators. That sound is their mating call. The louder, lower and scarier sounding, the more the female gator finds it attractive. Those must have been the swamp's sexiest gators, because I had never heard this sound in my life. I had been under the impression that I knew what their mating call sounded like from my childhood experiences in Okefenokee Joe's boat and with my father and uncle. These gators must have been absolutely massive, true units to produce the sounds we were hearing, because it was nothing like what I'd heard in the swamp. It was exactly like what was in the video. But I'm telling you, in person, you can physically feel it rattling your insides. Though I was somewhat comforted by the fact that the noise were just gators flirting and weren't being aggressive towards us, my wife and daughter still think we were in danger given our proximity. I got into Google Maps and tried to figure out exactly where we camped, because, from looking at the map the ranger had given us, we shouldn't have been that close to the water. I never could quite figure out where we'd ended up. I don't know if it was us being in the wrong place, or the fact that the area hadn't had any human activity for 2 years, or a combination of both, that put us so close to all this mating activity that normally wouldn't happen near areas with lots of humans. Either way, it made for a heart-pounding experience that we still talk about to this day. Also, for a small funny addition to the story, looking back, the most hilarious thing was that my daughter was eating corn on the cob at the time when we first heard the sound. It was still in her hands. So during this entire event of being terrified and hearing the growls, she was holding corn on the cob. I hope you enjoyed the story. I can assure you it was very real, and in some ways, one of the most frightening of my life. The fog, the setting, everything was perfect to make it that much creepier. And I'll never forget that particular kind of fear I experienced that night.
I'm 24 now, but when I was 17, I went with a small group of friends to a cemetery one summer night. We weren't there to cause trouble. Most of us were spiritual, not religious, and deeply respectful of places like it. We just wanted to visit some of the older graves. I've always felt peaceful there, like the energy there is soft, sleepy and comforting. That might be why it happened. I was near the back of the group, lingering behind to read all the older inscriptions, while the others walked ahead. That's the last thing I remember. The rest is what my friends told me later. Apparently, I called out to one of them, voice light and cheerful. Heh, this one's mine. At first, they thought I was joking around. But when my friend turned around to look at me, he stopped cold. Because it wasn't my voice. It was higher pitched, stranger, and off. And the way I spoke, the accent wasn't one that was mine. I shouldn't have died. It wasn't my fault. That's when the others walked back towards me. One of them asked, "What do you mean?" I looked right at them and said, "Well, you see, I was playing in the barn with the kittens, and the man came in with a gun, bang. I don't know why he did it. He was my daddy's best friend." And for the next 2 hours, they said I led them around the cemetery, pointing out graves and telling them about the people buried there, like I'd known them my whole life. Names, stories, deaths. One of my friends had her phone out for a light. She started recording, partially because she was scared, and partially because she wanted to fact-check whatever I was saying once we got home. Eventually, I stopped in front of a grave and stared down at the headstone, and I frowned. "This is my brother. He got to live long, long time. It's not fair. I wanted to live too." And then I stomped my foot like a child and collapsed. I didn't wake up until we were back at the house. The first thing I felt was a splitting headache, the worst of my life. I don't remember a thing about reading those old headstones. And they showed me the video. And it was me, but it wasn't. My voice, my posture, my expressions were all different. And everything I said checked out. We looked it up online, dates, names, relationships. Every story matched. Except for one detail. The grave I collapsed on, the one I said was my brother, wasn't related to the girl I'd apparently been channeling, not by blood. It belonged to the son of her father's best friend. The same best friend who, in her words, shot her dead in a barn while she was playing with kittens. I haven't returned to that cemetery, and I'm not sure if I ever will. I can't say for certain what will try and snatch my body next time, but I don't want to give it any chances.
I am currently studying law, and last semester had a creepy encounter with a boy on campus that still leaves me with the hair on the back of my neck sticking up straight. I've had several strange encounters in my life, and had a hard partying phase for a while that certainly left me in a precarious position. However, never in my life have I felt so uncomfortable and so suspect based off one interaction. Especially considering this was on the heels of a time spent in Paris, during which I'm almost certain my friend and I were human trafficking targets at a club one night. It was around President's Day weekend. I live in the graduate resident halls of the university, and it's a school known for its commuting undergraduate population, so the campus was fairly empty for a holiday weekend. It was either Saturday or Sunday, I don't remember which. I was hungover and wanting Starbucks, so I stumbled out of bed, showered, threw on a sweatshirt, leggings, and my long, tan, gorgeous winter wool coat, and head towards the campus dining hall and Starbucks. I had no makeup on, no bra, my hair still slightly damp, but the point is I didn't look cute. As I made my way out of the dorm with my headphones in, I noticed how eerily quiet and empty it was. It was always quiet on the weekends, as it always is in commuter schools or when students live off campus, but it was especially so on this day. My dorm is a short 3-minute walk to the main student center. In between my residence hall at one end and the student center on the other end is a walled straightaway path that connects to all 3 major parking lots. There are benches and tables to sit outside, but people rarely hang out there except to juul or smoke cigarettes. As I approached the path, I notice a guy in a blue hoodie and Adidas track pants loitering back and forth by the sidewalk benches. He was attractive from what I could tell, but looked younger than me, possibly a sophomore or a freshman. I didn't think anything of it at first, as many people from the university and public enter onto campus via this path, except he seemed to be waiting for me to come towards him. And just as I did come within a short distance of him, he began walking towards me. Now, right down the path, head on. So I think perhaps he was heading towards the dorms or parking lot. Unfortunately, this was the narrowest part of the path where it essentially bottlenecks, and instead he came towards me, still making eye contact, and opened his mouth as if to start a conversation. Being a petite female, I politely stopped, as he was now literally blocking my path, and I was caught between the 2 walls. I would have had to physically push past him to continue. I've always been one of those people who get stopped to be asked directions, or someone who strangers feel comfortable striking up conversations with. I lived in New York City for my undergraduate education, and this happened frequently on subways and on the streets with tourists. Thus, assuming he was asking for directions, as he did look a bit lost and shy, I took an AirPod out and asked, "Can I help you?" He was barely a head taller than me, and had on these red sports goggles that athletes with glasses wear during games, as well as a lime green string bag on his back that had the Navy logo on it. He was unassuming at first, but what he had to say was for sure a first on me. He said in the calmest and lowest toned voice, "Yes, you can help me. I'm sorry to stop you, but you're the most beautiful girl I've seen in a long time, and I had to introduce myself. My name is Nick." And with that, he moved in to about an inch from me and stuck his hand out for me to shake. Caught with my back to the wall and completely off guard, I stepped horizontally closer to the student center end of the path that said something along the lines of, "Oh, well thank you, that's nice." I did not shake his hand, which I found somehow the strangest thing of all. It was not a soft, graceful, nice to meet you gesture, but more a robotic and tense one. He then stepped closer to me and asked me what my name was. Feeling very off-put by how close he was to me, I told him my roommate's name and that it was nice to meet him, but I had to go, and began walking away. At this point, he follows me and grabs me by the shoulder, jerking me back and stops me. "Wait, I saw you come from the graduate hall. Are you a graduate student here? I've never seen you before. Can I have your number? I'd like to see you again." Now this guy's close to me. I'm facing him and was looking him dead into his Adam's apple. I felt as though he was ready to almost pick me up, if that makes any sense. I again step back and say, "Unfortunately, yes, I'm a law student, and that I'm sorry, no, my boyfriend wouldn't like it. And that I said I actually have to go meet him now for breakfast, so goodbye, nice to meet you." With this, he finally lets me leave, and I speed walk to the student center and look over my shoulder, only to see him walking in the opposite direction away from me and towards the parking lot. I was pretty shook up with how aggressive he was, and also that he had essentially watched me leave my dorm. Relieved, I get my food, and then I get in line for Starbucks. Now, I don't have a boyfriend I was meeting, of course, I made that up. I was still alone, but the school had a very open-air dining hall, and the Starbucks is always packed with people. The Starbucks area has glass walls around the entrance so you can see who goes in and leaves the student center. As I'm standing there waiting for my drink, lo and behold, Nick comes strolling in. He spots me and stops dead in his tracks right outside the glass wall, and literally puts his hand on the glass to peer in at me. Now, an older man, presumably a professor, is sitting right by the walls and notices this strange behavior and lowers his newspaper, and looks around following the same eye gaze as Nick. Me and the older man make dead eye contact, and he gives me a strange look. Just as this happens, my drink is ready, so I grab the coffee and turn away. A group of frat boys were walking towards me, so I waved at a random one and pretended to know him as they were deeper into the cafeteria away from Nick. The kid waves back at me and smiles. Hoping to throw Nick off, I look back to where he was standing and he was gone, just gone. The old guy is watching this, clearly confused as hell, and I'm standing there literally shaking. The frat boy then yelled out some random girl's name, guessing I was his blackout hookup from the night before, I bet. So I look around, frozen for a second, and I thought I spotted his bag from behind one of the side pillars of the food buffet, but I didn't waste time finding out. Seeing my chance, I dead sprint out the cafe and back down the path, not stopping until I key into my dorm with my ID. I made it back and threw up in the bathroom. I don't know why this interaction freaked me out so much, or why my body had a physical reaction to it, as I don't have any history of anxiety, nerves, or assault. But what I do know is I have not been able to get this out of my head for a long time. I don't think Nick is or was a student at my school, or if he was put up to it by a frat boy or who knows, but for whatever reason he was hanging out on the path. Quite frankly, it felt like he was waiting for the right person to come along. Lucky for me, I was not the right person, and have not run into Nick again. But you can bet every time I'm on that path I walk a little bit faster now, with my head always on a swivel, scanning for that lime green navy string bag.
In 2007, I was 11, and my mum moved us to a small town near our family's reservation. The part of town where we lived was built on old indigenous burial grounds. It was me, my mum, 2 younger siblings, and a cousin a couple of years older than me. We always heard things, people saying our names, stuff being moved, stuff seen out of the corner of your eye. But being so young, it slipped our minds easy. What didn't slip our minds was the uneasiness we all felt. All of us constantly felt watched. We were never truly alone in that house. If we had to be, we'd hang around outside instead of staying in there alone. One day we were messing around with my mum, and she was chasing us around the house. We ran upstairs into her bedroom and locked the door. Mum banged on the door saying, "Open it up, I'm gonna get you." Then all of a sudden she started banging. "Let me in right now, open right up, oh my god, right now!" So we did, and she ran in and locked the door. My mum was so pale and looked like hell, and after calming down, she told us that after banging on the door, she had turned to go downstairs. When she looked down, there was a man with long dark hair and a top hat, peeking his head around the corner at the bottom of the stairs. The man stepped out dressed in all black, and looked as if he was going to come up, so she started banging and yelling for us to open up. Another time in the same house, my cousin was napping, so I crawled in with her as the big spoon. There was a small TV facing her bed, and I was dozing off when I felt something hit me. When I looked, there was a fist-sized indent on the blanket. In the summer of '07, a woman was brutally murdered. My grandma was friends with the cops, so she told my mum right in front of us kids all the horrible details. We lived about 3 to 4 houses down from the woman, and we'd all hung out with her the night it happened. For days we would walk by and see blood all over the windows. A couple of weeks later, we were walking by the house and saw that poor woman in her window. My cousin and I started running because we knew what she looked like and knew what had happened. We got so scared, obviously. Thankfully, we moved out that summer.
"3 years ago, on a night when the air felt unusually thick, I drifted into a dream that seemed so real, so vivid, that I struggled to separate it from waking memory. I found myself entering the familiar classroom from my gender and sexuality class at college. It looked like any other day. Sunlight filtering through the blinds, the soft murmur of students settling into their seats. But something in the atmosphere felt off, and a sense of unease washed over me as I walked in. I took my seat next to my friend and waited for the class to begin. My eyes scanned the room idly, the hum of the fluorescent lights above mingling with the faint shuffling of papers. Then my teacher stood up in the front, her voice cutting through the silence. "All right, everyone, I have a surprise for you," she said. Her attempt at enthusiasm was forced, her words almost a tired routine. I could feel her awareness for how mundane this surprise was. She continued, "I thought I might shake things up and have you guys do some group work today." And the class collectively groaned. She began numbering us off, and we split into 5 groups. A strange sensation crept over me, like the room was closing in, and I felt a tightening in my chest. The desks scraped across the floor as we rearranged, and I ended up sitting beside a girl with long brown hair, her rainbow leggings almost glowing in the harsh light. To her left sat a heavy-set guy, his beard thick and unruly, his plaid Scottish cap perched on his head, and I found myself zoning in and out of the conversation. The guy in the cap mentioned Flogging Molly, a band I had never really thought about, but in that moment the words seemed to reverberate around me. The girl beside him smiled, nodding eagerly. "Yeah, they're great." As if I should have known this. Something about all of this felt weird. Suddenly the conversation seemed to drag on endlessly, each word sinking deeper into that pit of my stomach. I felt trapped in this loop, the same pattern repeating over and over. I tried to focus, but the room was shifting around me. And then I woke up. My morning. I opened my eyes to the harsh light. It was 9:10, the same hour I had dreamt that I would awake. I tried to grasp the remnants of the dream. It was so real. I could still feel the weight of it on my chest, and the lingering sensation of something being wrong. I had to leave for my gender and sexuality class in an hour, so I rolled out of bed and did the usual morning things. Shower, dress, eat, brush my teeth. But I couldn't escape the feeling that something wasn't right. The dream felt too much like a premonition. I caught the bus on time and arrived at class as the doors opened. I sat beside my friends as usual, scanning the room. And then my heart skipped 2 beats. There she was, the girl in my dream, wearing the same rainbow leggings. I tried to brush it off as coincidence. Maybe she'd worn them before and I'm just noticing it again. and the guy in the Scottish plaid cap as well, sitting next to her. He looked almost identical from the guy in the dream. Deja vu gripped me hard. It was the same class, the same work, the same everything. My teacher stood up at the front, giving the exact same speech that she had in my dream. She numbered us off, and I found myself in the same group as the girl with the rainbow leggings and the guy in the cap. The conversation started slow and unremarkable, but then, like in my dream, the topic turned to music, and someone casually mentioned everyone's favorite band. And suddenly, Flogging Molly came up again. The girl beside him nodded, and the same discourse happened. I sat there, throat dry, the weight of the moment crushing me. What exactly is happening here? The conversation drifted away, but my mind raced. I said something to interrupt the flow. I don't remember what. People looked up at me for a moment and carried on their conversation. The feeling of panic stayed with me, and then I reached the point that wasn't in my dream. Things that happened after, if it would have continued. Class ended, and I left the room quickly, trying to escape the weight of it all. And after a while, the strange feeling subsided, and life went on as normal. But it left me with a deep-seated fear. What was that all about? Did I manage to dream my mundane class and what it would be like? Or was there maybe some kind of glitch in our reality, and I had my morning class played for me early in my head? I'm not sure. It's left me with many questions and no answers, and if anyone can help, I'd be grateful.
I need to tell you about Liwan Plaza in Guangzhou, China. It has long been surrounded in fear and mystery, and many Cantonese people see it as no coincidence that the cursive-like character Guang outside the plaza bears an uncanny resemblance to the word for corpse. And since 2004, about 12 people have taken their lives on sight, with some witnesses claiming that a supernatural force seemingly pushed victims over the railings. The mall's deadly curse, according to local residents, began many years ago when it was first constructed. And if you've ever watched Poltergeist, you'll know never to build on ancient burial grounds. But you wouldn't expect a bunch of real estate developers to know that, would you? Home to a Qing dynasty sacrificial chamber, inspectors failed to notice 8 empty coffins when erecting Liwan Plaza, now a large jewelry market near Shangchuan Pedestrian Street. It was unearthed during the construction, and some say the coffins were the cradle of strange noises and mysterious deaths that kept storefronts ruinously empty. To counteract the malevolence, architects made the building resemble an octagon, like the Bagua. Eventually, a Taoist priest informed landlords that the empty coffins had originally been buried to thwart evil influence. The catch was they were not to be disturbed for 1,000 years. Whoops! Since then, several accidents have been reported, most of them on the 5th floor. At least 2 of the landlords that managed the plaza have allegedly passed away of unknown and sudden causes. Now, despite Guangzhou's toasty climate, Chinese citizens claim it's always a few degrees cooler in the plaza itself, and just walking through the building at night brings a chilling feeling of despair. And as with most supernatural affairs, no concrete evidence exists to prove the plaza is haunted one way or another. Skeptics argue the prevalence of people taking their lives there could be due to its infamous reputation or insensitive media coverage, or both. Regardless, the building's occupants now mostly consist of non-local business owners happy to make a quick buck while the silent run amok. And now, where our story begins. It was a sunny afternoon when I decided to visit my uncle at Liwan Plaza, and my uncle's shop was located on the 5th floor, funnily enough. the very floor where many of the mysterious incidents occurred. He had always kept an 8 trigram, a Taoist symbol known for warding off evil, hanging above the door. However, the nail holding it in place had started to come loose, and my uncle decided it was time to take it down and fix it. As he removed the trigram, a strange, almost palpable chill filled the air. My uncle, usually a calm and collected man, seemed to be in a trance. His eyes glazed over, and without a word, he began walking towards the stairs. I realized something was quite wrong with him. At first, I thought he was playing a practical joke of some kind, but he kept going up the stairs. That's when I realized there might actually be something wrong. So I followed him. But by the time I caught up with him, he was already at the top floor near the roof edge. He was looking down with a vacant expression. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached out to grab him. It was then that my young cousin appeared, running towards us with the 8 trigram in his hand. The moment he put it back above the door, my uncle snapped out of this weird trance. Later, as we pieced together what happened, it became clear that removing the 8 trigram had disturbed the restless spirits tied to the plaza. And from that day on, my uncle never tampered with the protective symbol again.
I am a park ranger, and many people don't really understand my job. They assume I'm just at a booth, taking a few bills, handing out the odd map, and wishing people a good hike. To be honest, I sort of thought that too before I started. The booth, for one, isn't as safe as you would imagine. Let me give you some context. It was a late afternoon, the sun hanging low, and the sky turning a lovely purple and orange shade. Then, this man pulled up, with blacked-out windows. I caught the sharp scent of gas and cigarettes before I even saw him. I stepped forward, voice steady, but inside my skin was crawling. And that's when I saw what he was holding. A machete. He didn't say a word. He stared at me with unreadable eyes, one hand resting on the hilt. Then, without warning, he pulled back his lips into a grin that didn't reach his eyes, more of a leer of pure malice, and he unleashed a storm of curses, not just angry words, but a promise to harm me. All he wanted to do was for me to hear that. Then he slammed his car into reverse, spinning tires tearing up the dirt, as he performed a reckless U-turn that sent him nearly crashing into the ditch, and he vanished down the road. And that was the last I saw of him. Or so I thought. Hours later, just as the moon slipped back behind thick clouds, I thought I heard a soft scrape coming from the edge of the trees. I leaned out of the window. There was nothing. And then I saw a shadow detach itself from the forest. He was there, standing beyond the beam of my flashlight, the machete gleaming against the moon. No car this time. No words. It was like he was stalking me. I slammed the window of the little booth shut and locked it, fumbling for the emergency button, but my radio was dead. I grabbed my flashlight and bolted from the booth, hoping to outrun him, to lose him in the maze of trees. Behind me, the sound of heavy boots pounding on the soft earth grew louder, the rasp of the machete slicing through the underbrush. I ran blindly, the moonlight barely piercing the canopy, and then I heard the man's voice. "You can't hide here." Panic clawed at my chest. I don't know how I managed to outrun him, but I made my way to a very big rock and hid behind it. He never thought to look and just ran on. I waited for about 15 minutes when I knew he was probably far enough away or lost before I made my retreat back quietly. Then I got into my car and drove away. It really made me think about me wanting to work as a park ranger after that.
This past summer, I lost my grand-aunt Helena, my maternal grandmother's sister. We travelled to Agioi, in the Peloponnesus region of Greece where my grandmother's family is from, to visit the family tomb and pay our respects. I wasn't prepared for what I felt when we arrived. The ceremony was stunning, immaculately maintained. It stretched across a low, tree-dotted hill and seemed to go on forever. At least 3 miles if you were to walk the whole thing. I found out later the oldest graves dated back to 1816, and that genuinely shocked me. But even more surprising was that it was a public cemetery. In my experience, public cemeteries in Greece are rarely so well tended. This one was peaceful in a way I can barely describe. It was blazing hot that day everywhere else, but outside the cemetery there was a perfect gentle breeze. When I visited my paternal grandmother's grave, I always sensed a coldness. The cemetery feels angry somehow, like the land is tired. The one where my maternal grandparents are buried feels different still. It felt alive in a way, like I was surrounded by family, even the ones I had never met. I felt like I was being embraced. It was like all my ancestors were there just out of sight, watching and welcoming me. As we approached the family grave, I was like, "Hi, nice to meet you all." I didn't want my parents to hear. I didn't want them to think I was being weird. But I felt like I had to say something. And that's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Not literally, or maybe literally, I'm not sure, but it was warm. And I nearly cried. I'm blinking back tears just writing this, just like I blinked them back then. I felt like somehow someone heard me. Like someone had been waiting for me to show up and say hello. You see, I never got the chance to know my grandparents. I never met either of them. My grandmothers died before I could say goodbye, and my granduncles and grandaunts were mostly gone by the time I was old enough to form real memories. I was 5 or 6 the last time I saw any of them, and the last of them passed away when I was 10. I wasn't even allowed to attend the funeral. I used to carry that grief like a stone in my chest. I would dream of them often, dream of old Athenian coffee shops from the 50s, of my great-grandfather's workshop, of family homes I never got to grow up in. I'd wake up from those dreams with a kind of longing. But standing there in the sun, something shifted. I didn't want to leave the cemetery. But as we walked away, I felt lighter and happier, like I'd finally made peace with something I didn't realize I was still grieving. I felt like they knew me, like they always had. And despite the tangled histories and complicated family ties, they loved me anyway. That they welcomed me. And that was the most peaceful experience I have ever had in a cemetery. And just really wanted to share it.
This happened several times at this point, and started 16 months ago when I was cleaning my house around midnight. My husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, worked nights, so I just adjusted to his schedule. I usually kept the blinds open during the day, and would go around closing them at night while I tidied up before bed. Our rooms were the last stop on the first night this happened. The curtains and blinds were open as I was sweeping the floor, when I felt the sensation of being watched. I looked around me, when my eyes focused on this silver sedan parked outside my house, mostly in the grass on my front lawn. Now for context, my bedroom window is about 50 yards from the road in front of my house. It's a small front yard in a pretty densely populated neighborhood. I saw the car before I saw them. I'm not sure, but there was clearly someone sitting in the driver's seat of the car, and another person standing about 5 yards from my window, clearly staring at me. The only reason I could see this is because the moon was fairly bright that night. I shrieked and dropped to the floor and crawled to the light switch to turn it off, so I couldn't be seen. and called my husband to ask him what I should do. Call the cops? Duh. I did. Of course, by the time they got there, the car was gone. They asked if I could see my security footage, but the footage from the section of time was just gone also. It skipped over the few minutes that they would have been outside. This has happened several times since, and I've completely given up on calling the police, as I feel as if I'm going crazy. I have no proof that this happened, but I would like to get some opinions as to what they may be doing. In the past 16 months, it's happened about 10 times. Sometimes the person is standing in the yard, sometimes they aren't. The car has been different every single time, but the light is always on inside the cabin of the vehicle. But when I go to look, the people inside are never looking where I can see their faces. I'll run to grab my phone to call someone or take a picture, but they'll already be gone.
The elementary school that I went to, and the town that it's in, has a history. The short story is that the town I live in was founded by a group of families, and I happen to be a descendant of one of them. Anyway, the elementary school was built over a Native American burial ground that had long since been abandoned when more settlers came over to the New World, and it had other supernatural things. Let me share one of my experiences. When we were taking the elevator down to the basement, the doors opened and we walked into a storage room at the end of the hallway that was dimly lit, which had flickering light bulbs. We entered the room and got the machines, and on our way back to the elevator, we stopped just before the corner to enter it. That's when we saw an apparition of a woman standing about 10 feet in front of us. As soon as we stopped, she turned to look, then turned away again and disappeared around the other corner. We entered the elevator and brought up the machines. Before the door opened for the first floor, we looked at each other and tried to talk about what happened, but we were honestly unsure what to say. Another encounter I had in the school, for context, was when I was in 6th grade and was in the library for an after-school program with a few other kids, a teacher and the librarian. I was sitting between stacks of books reading one, which happened to be about ghosts and the supernatural, when I heard a knock on the wall behind me, which was a wall of cinder blocks. Then a book on the opposite end of where I was sitting fell off the shelf, and I saw a shadow walking between the shelves and vanish. When I got up and looked, there was nothing there. There are other ghost stories about that school, and there have been encounters, but they aren't mine to share. Point is, since they built the school on an Indian burial ground, I'm not surprised that spooky stuff happens.
We were driving through some deep forest in northern Mexico, the kind that looks straight out of a horror movie. Endless pine trees, fog hanging low, and barely any other cars. It had rained earlier, so the air was thick with that wet earth and pine smell. The road was all twists and turns, there being no streetlights, just nature. At some point, we took a wrong turn. No big deal, or so we thought. Just a dumb mistake. But I was annoyed, because I'd wasted time for no reason. So we turned around and got back on track. Then as we came out of this curb, we saw it. A massive tree had just crashed across the road. And I mean it. The roots were still wet and muddy, like the ground had given up on holding them. If we hadn't have taken that wrong turn, if we hadn't have wasted those few minutes, we would have been under that tree. No time to brake, no way to dodge. Just a straight-up final destination moment. And I'm 100% sure the timing would have just been us right there. We sat there staring at it, my heart pounding, as the rain hit the car. I was pissed about losing time, and now I couldn't stop thinking about how those stupid minutes wasted had probably kept us alive. It still freaks me out. Sometimes the universe messes with you in the best possible way.
For context, I live in a very rural area in the midwestern part of the United States, about 20 minutes away from the nearest town, and about 6 minutes from the nearest township. For those of you who have lived in the sticks, you know as well as I that creepy sounds and sightings that make you second-guess what you saw are commonplace if you spend any amount of time outdoors at night. It was 3:30 on a Saturday morning. I was driving home alone from a party on a small, lightless country road leading out of the nearest township to my house. There are 2 cemeteries, the old cemetery and the one that they still actively plant people in. These cemeteries are on either side of the road, and there are about 200 feet from each other, or roughly 61 meters. I had just passed the second cemetery and taken a curve into a part of the forest that was especially dense. No moonlight penetrated the canopy of the trees that reached across the road. I slowed down in case a deer decided to jump out in front of me, as was frequent in that area. That's when I saw it. There was a large dark mass in the middle of the road. At first I thought perhaps it was a limb or a dog of some sort, but as my headlights illuminated the creature, I knew all too well this was abnormal at best. There, standing in the road, was a large black bird, the size of a vulture, but it had no head. Now, as an educated person, I know full well that when a bird roosts, it tucks its head under its wings, in many cases, and that could fully explain this. That was what logic and reason would tell you, although I've never known a bird to roost on the ground, let alone in the middle of a busy road. I stopped my Jeep about 10 yards from the bird, with my headlights illuminating it. I sat and pondered the situation for a moment, and honked to see if it would startle it into flying away, but it didn't stir. I sat there for a moment longer, and this horrible sense of dread filled my soul. I then decided to drive carefully around the sleeping bird. I stopped and rolled down my window and shone a light down on it to get a better look up close. Instead of finding its head, I looked down at the bloody gullet of a decapitated specimen. From there, I admit my terror was real, and I made haste in leaving this unsavory omen behind. The next morning, the bird was gone without a trace, not a drop of blood to be seen. I wonder what it was.
My neighbor used to be a park ranger for the National Park Service. He's retired now, but every once in a while after a few drinks, he'll start sharing these stories with me. He was working an overnight shift in the Appalachian Mountains on a clear night. It was around 75. About 30 minutes into his patrol, he felt something tap his shoulder. It was a sticky plop of liquid, and instinctively he reached up and wiped it off. When he looked at his fingers under the beam of his flashlight, they were coated in blood. That's when the real horror began. He tilted his lights up into the trees, high above, near 100 feet up, where the mangled carcass of a deer, twisted like it had been crushed in a vice, its limbs bent in ways nature never intended, and flesh hung from its splintered bone. The thing wasn't just dead. It looked violently staged. And the tree it was lodged in? It had no branches for at least the first 20 feet. No cougar or bear could have dragged it up there. He was sure of it. There weren't even supposed to be cougars in that part of the state. He stood there frozen. The forest felt suddenly very heavy. The next day when he returned with a crew to examine it, the deer was gone. Not a trace of the blood, not a disturbed branch. But that feeling that he was being watched persisted. The second story creeped me out the most. My neighbor wasn't on duty for this one. He was on vacation, hiking through New River Gorge National Park in West Virginia. It's massive. Over 65,000 acres of twisting trails, ghost towns, and sheer wilderness. He'd been hiking a familiar trail when he noticed a faint side path, probably a deer trail, or maybe something cut by bikers. He was in an adventurous mood, so he veered off, breaking branches, and went to mark his route. The further he walked, the quieter it got. No birdsong, no wind, just stillness. That's when he found it. In a clearing was a building, not a cabin, but a full-size structure. And it wasn't crumbling or decayed. The windows were intact. The roof looked solid. No moss, no rot, just there, like it had been dropped in the woods yesterday. Curious, he got closer, and the building turned out to be a church. The front door wasn't locked. He stepped inside quietly, and the air smelled faintly of damp stone and candle wax. But the inside was clean, too clean. No debris. The pews were intact. The altar was standing, and sitting on the altar was a large, leather-bound book. He walked closer and realized something was off. The book wasn't a Bible. The text was strange, no language he recognized, and the symbols decorating the walls and altar weren't crosses. They were unfamiliar, jagged, and intricate, like something out of an ancient cult. That's when the feeling hit him. When your skin prickles up, and your stomach knots, and every instinct was screaming at him to get out of there. He backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. Then he heard a soft creak. He didn't wait to see who or what was there. He bolted out the door and sprinted into the woods, following his broken branch tail back to safety, and didn't look back. Later he reported the building to the park authorities. They dismissed it. Probably an old church left over from a mining town that was still structurally sound. There was no need to check it. But he knows what he saw, and what he felt. That he was never supposed to step inside that place, and something else must have been in there with him. He said he still dreams about it, the book, the symbols, and the silence, and the footsteps following behind. I'm a high school student, and this started in October of 2022 on a Jewish holiday called Yom Kippur, which translates to Day of Repentance. On that day I went to the town square and just chilled there, met some new people and spoke. And being bored, I chose to go along with my peers in the hopes of meeting someone new. That's when I met a girl called Emma. I met her through mutual friends. She went to a different school in a different town and often doesn't come near mine, as her parents are divorced and her mum has custody of her in her own town, while her dad lives in the same town as me. We spoke a bit. She was shy and socially awkward, and I made up some stuff about my parents wanting me home as it was getting late. Before I left, she asked for my Instagram. I'm fairly active on social media, mostly posting comedic stories, just low-effort jokes that people seem to like. I've noticed that she always views my stories first. Coincidence? Perhaps. But it seems to be seconds after I post them, which I suspect maybe she had notifications on for, but maybe that was just my ego. She responded to a lot of them. She texted in a flirty way, and a lot of heart emojis, and things which were flirty. I got a bit of a creepy vibe when she started sending dirty texts, but I assumed she was just joking. Around December was the first time she tried to meet up with me. She persuaded me, but I didn't crack under peer pressure, so I just kept up with some excuses. Around mid-January, she started texting me on WhatsApp. I never gave her my number, but it was safe to assume one of our mutual friends gave it to her. A bit creepy, but whatever. There were a few phone calls that I missed because I was busy, and she kept texting me inappropriate jokes and I started to ignore her, usually just replying one-word answers. That's when she got angry, but I just hoped shutting her out would be the best way to move forward and to give her a hint. But in February she crossed a line. Out of the blue she texted me the name of my street and a number to try and throw her off my tail. I just responded with a question mark. She followed up by telling me, "That's where you live, isn't it? Your mate told me, isn't it?" Being freaked out, I left her on red, hoping everything would go away. In the meantime, I tried figuring out how she got the address. I did some online digging, and it was the address that showed after searching for my father's full name, one I'd never told her. She messaged me again a few days later, asking me to let her come over. I told her to leave me alone, and she tried to convince me to take her out on a date. I told her I was gay. She called me every homophobic slur in the book, some of which I'd never even heard. The following morning, she sent me a voice message from a different account, telling me how much she was sorry and that she loves me. I told her again that I was gay, and that I'm just not interested. Then silence. Have I reached peace at last? It's been a few days without hearing from her, and all was good, and I quickly forgot of her existence. But around a week after the whole ordeal, my mum was supposed to drive me to school. But when we got in the car, I noticed a tire was punctured. I had a bad feeling about it. In hindsight, I realized that my dog barked maniacally the night before, but I assumed it was just me being delusional and one of those coincidences. Over the next few days, I had that sinking feeling that something was wrong, like I was being watched, every time I was following a routine like going to the gym or walking the dog. I thought I saw her at the mall, but there are only 2 malls in my town, so it's not unlikely. She didn't seem to notice me. A day before my birthday, I got a bouquet of flowers delivered to me along with some balloons and a note just saying, "I love you." No clue who they were from, but it didn't bother me to ask the delivery driver. I just guessed my friends were messing with me. They knew I was on edge about this, but I wasn't sure if it was them. For my birthday day, I went out with my friends to drink. I take an antidepressant, so I often don't go crazy when I drink, only a little drunk. The parents of my friends who live 20 minutes away were on vacation, so he was the host. I posted some pics to my story of us just messing around in his front yard. We made too much noise, and the cops were called, so we had to cut it short. Walking back home, I felt paranoid. I get a bit worried when I drink, but I tried to ignore those thoughts. There was a woman who kept a short distance from behind me, but again, I ignored my gut and assumed it was a coincidence. I stopped on my walk and went into some shrubbery because I just had to bath, and I felt my hair being pulled into a ponytail. It was the lady. She held my hair for me. She told me to sit down and wait before I continued. I listened to her and sat cross-legged with my face looking down. I had my face down out of shame, because I was afraid I'd suddenly puke all over her face if I looked up. She looked familiar. Her voice was oddly familiar too and soothing. She was pretty touchy, but I didn't overthink it as I was out of my senses. That's when she began slowly moving her hand towards my pants and genitals, and I finally told her to stop. I looked her in the face to try and stop her when suddenly, as you probably would have guessed, it was Emma. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. I was too dizzy. She went to grab my shoulder, but I slapped her hand away and told her to leave me alone. She put her hand under my chin, and that was it. I don't remember why, but I reflexively punched her. It was just a weak punch, but a punch is a punch. She backed off, and I apologized and stumbled away, and I cried on the walk home. I am a pacifist and strictly anti-violence, and I never punched another person. It's against my moral code to punch a woman, but I still felt guilty. I got a message from an unknown number telling me I'm a dead man, but since then, nothing happened. But I'm still paranoid, guilty, and disgusted with myself. I haven't heard from her for 3 months, and honestly I'd like to keep it that way.